Bastian. Chapter 31, Summer Bride. The wedding proceedings were held on the hottest day of the year. Odette warily looked out the window, which provided a wide-ranging view of the ocean. The ceremony's location, Bastian Clauswitz's most recent residence, was reached along a pathway that followed the strait. Odette perched herself by the carriage window and gazed upon the sea. The Ardenne Sea, aglow with the summer solstice sunshine, sparkled with magnificent silver-white undulations. As the oppressive silence lingered on, a voice, laden with a hint of remorse, shattered the stillness. "Your mother had an affection for that very sea as well." Odette looked at the middle-aged man seated across from her with a hint of surprise. It was none other than Grand Duke Rainer, the Emperor's cousin, who had graciously offered to lead Odette down the aisle in place of her father. Despite his acquiescence to the imperial decree, the Grand Duke did not conceal his reservations. Their initial encounter took place that very morning within the confines of Countess Trier's abode, and they had traveled together in his carriage to arrive at their present location. His interactions with Odette thus far had been limited to formal felicitations. "During the summer, she would grace our family's villa in Ardenne with her presence," he recounted. Amidst reminiscing about Helene, the Grand Duke's rugged features were transformed by a gentle expression. With her radiance and beauty, she drew affection and hospitality from all those around her. Helene was akin to a sparkling gem. Odette only then understood the Grand Duke's relationship with her mother in its entirety. He was not only her mother's beloved distant relative, but also a kind-hearted imperial cousin. She used to proclaim that the Ardenne Sea was the most magnificent of all the seas on this planet. But, that was a recollection from a bygone era, and one can only speculate as to whether her sentiments have evolved since then. With a wistful tone, the Grand Duke recollected. "I'm certain that my mother's adoration for the Ardenne Sea remains steadfast, just as it was in her childhood. She treasured her memories dearly." With a tender smile and consoling tone, Odette sought to ease the Grand Duke's sorrow. It was difficult to fathom that the vibrant girl he remembered was now her mother. For Odette, the image of her mother was one of melancholy and anxiety. Occasionally, amidst the harsh realities of life, a shimmering remnant of the glorious past would break through, illuminating her mother with a resplendent radiance. In those fleeting moments, Odette glimpsed a glimpse of her mother's true essence, a captivating soul that had been dulled by the hardships of life. With a fervent desire to cherish her mother's memory, Odette yearned to cling on to those ephemeral moments of brilliance and hoped that those who knew her mother would also hold on to them with equal fervor. The daughter of a princess, sold off to the grandson of an antique dealer. It's a disheartening turn of events, and it leaves me wondering what the future holds for our world. The Grand Duke lamented with a heavy heart. A deep sigh escaped his lips as he furrowed his brow in despair. The world was evolving at an unprecedented pace, and the currents of change were raging like a fierce torrent. Keeping up with the swift pace of transformation was proving to be an immense challenge. "I understand that the position you've been put in is a difficult one, and it's not easy to refuse the Emperor's orders," she acknowledged. "Yet, I am incredibly grateful for the invaluable assistance you have provided." With a steady and unwavering gaze reminiscent of her mother's, Odette expressed her gratitude, catching the Grand Duke off guard. "Orders?" "If only it had been as simple as receiving orders," the Grand Duke remarked with a rueful smile. "In that case, I might have found some solace in carrying out my duties." Despite his attempt at humor, the Grand Duke's expression remained downcast, leaving Odette still perplexed by the complexity of the situation. The Grand Duke heaved a deep sigh, shaking his head mournfully. "It is a pity, really. It seems like you don't know your groom very well," he said with a tinge of sadness in his voice. As the carriage rolled through the gates of the magnificent estate, the jewel of Ardenne situated on the northern coast, the picturesque scenery did little to alleviate the heavy atmosphere. "Be ready to dismount." With a sharp order, the Grand Duke's voice pierced the atmosphere. He gave the command, his face etched with worry. Odette felt his fear but chose not to speak, dropping her veil submissively without questioning his motives. As the carriage drew closer to Bastian Clauswitz's new mansion, the Grand Duke's heart sank at the sight of the radiant bride. Yet, his momentary sadness was soon overshadowed by a greater shock as the vastness of the estate, complete with a sprawling forest and sandy beach, came into view. The sheer scale of the property left the Grand Duke reeling, but his thoughts were quickly disrupted by the realization that Ardenne was about to get a lot noisier thanks to the arrival of the Clauswitz couple. It was a jarring thought that left him stunned and dazed, struggling to process the sudden turn of events. Franz's teeth ground together, his fists balling up tightly in frustration, Crazy bastard. His parents were similarly horrified by what they saw. Bastian smirked casually, which only served to accentuate the feeling of astonishment in the room. Jeff Clauswitz stood before the magnificent mansion, his eyes wide in disbelief. What the hell is this? The grandeur of the building left him gasping for a breath, unable to articulate his thoughts. Its marble columns and intricate facade made it look like an ancient temple risen from the ground. In a moment of surreal disbelief, Jeff counted the pillars, 8, just like in his own Clauswitz mansion. But that was just the beginning. As he looked around, he couldn't believe his eyes. The similarities were endless, from the layout of the building and garden to the shape of the flower beds and fountains. It was as if the Clauswitz mansion had been replicated, down to the smallest detail. But what was the purpose of this strange mimicry? Jeff couldn't fathom it. The two identical mansions facing each other, with a crescent-shaped bay in between, looked like a bizarre reflection in a distorted mirror. It was as if someone had taken a decalcomania and folded it in half, creating a surreal and unsettling image. "Oh, I guess I forgot to tell you." Bastian shrugged nonchalantly, as if forgetting to mention it was of little consequence. "Funny how things work, isn't it? Despite leaving your abode due to your heinous treatment, I couldn't help but feel a yearning for Erdene deep inside me. So when I decided to build a new mansion, it was only natural for me to think of my dear old childhood home. After all, it was so wonderful being beaten and abused every day, don't you think?" He chuckled bitterly, his words laced with sarcasm. "Once a reckless child, now a crazy adult," Franz muttered under his breath as he surveyed the absurd scene before him. He gazed out in disbelief, as if looking at a mirage in the scorching desert. The news of the sale of the land on the other side of the coastal forested bay to an unknown tycoon had reached his ears long ago. But seeing the result of it firsthand, he couldn't help but mutter in disdain. The site was a familiar one, and so he didn't pay it much attention. Judging from the grand scale of the construction, it was clear that the owner was not an ordinary person, but that was the extent of his thoughts on the matter. Little did he know that the madman behind it all was none other than Bastian Clauswitz himself, carrying out his grand plan right under everyone's noses. The sheer magnitude of the project left Franz perplexed, wondering how on earth Bastian had managed to amass such a colossal amount of funds. It was rumored that his maternal grandfather was a renowned moneylender, but their family fortune had dwindled significantly in recent years. Despite this, Bastian had still managed to climb the ranks of the military and accumulate enough wealth to execute his grand scheme. The man couldn't help but wonder why someone with such vast resources would choose to live such a tumultuous life. As Theodor Clauswitz stumbled in shock, Franz rushed to support his mother with a twisted expression of rage and humiliation. Bastian, on the other hand, seemed unnervingly calm despite the chaos around them. "Oh, mother," Franz muttered through gritted teeth, his eyes fixed on his cousin. "Consider it the yearning of a son to emulate his father." With a courteous gesture, Bastian spoke, "I aspire for the Clauswitz family's image of mutual reflection to become a model for the entire empire." As he finished his sentence, a sudden intrusion of new guests made their entrance. Franz's belief of nothing worse happening shattered instantly as he laid his eyes on their faces. Bastian pivoted and approached the newly arrived crown prince and crown princess, his countenance undisturbed, indicating the meeting had been prearranged. They exchanged affectionate salutations and took their places at the bride's side, signifying that this union had been orchestrated by the imperial family. Franz pivoted and massaged his inflamed visage. The crown prince, assuming the role of the bride's relative, implied that she was now a member of the royal family and that Bastian Clauswitz was her consort, a far cry from Franz's earlier belief that Bastian was a hapless creature ensnared in the emperor's machination. "Stay put, Franz." His father's commanding voice called out to him, as Franz was about to take his leave. The firm grip of his father's hand on his shoulder sent a shiver down his spine, filling him with a sense of apprehension. "Father, we mustn't go any further. It's a cleverly laid trap intended to humiliate and shame us," Franz urgently warned, his voice tinged with fear and desperation. "Speak softly, for there are many ears attentive." Jeff Clauswitz's voice dropped to a whisper as he gestured for Franz to do the same and his eyes scanned the surroundings. As Franz complied, he suddenly became aware of the curious gazes of the wedding guests trained upon him. Although the event was meant to be an intimate gathering of family members, the presence of so many high society elites meant that any scandalous behavior would quickly become the talk of the town. It was clear that every move they made would be scrutinized and discussed at length in the coming days. "Fleeing like cowards will only earn us ridicule," Jeff retorted sternly. Franz's voice trembled as he spoke. Are we not but mere clowns, forced to perform on this pathetic platform? Be the clown for the moment, Jeff suggested. It's more worthy than succumbing to cowardice. His father quickly made his way to the seats designated for them after whispering the command. Franz moved his feet grudgingly. He was perched on the chair in front of the podium for the wedding when he looked up and witnessed an amazing scene. A familiar landscape loomed across the bay, and prior to arriving, he had believed that nothing could surpass the grandeur of the esteemed Clauswitz family's abode. As he nervously gnawed on his lips, the delicate flesh began to bleed. His agitation was interrupted by the announcement of the bride's arrival, signaling the commencement of the wedding ceremony. Right after, the commencement of the wedding celebration had begun. Middle. The wedding podium was strategically positioned to face the stunning cerulean sea, creating a breathtaking backdrop. Without a hint of hesitation, Bastian strolled down the path that led to the altar, his ceremonial attire glistening magnificently in the early summer sun. While there was a certain degree of splendor to the occasion, there was little excitement to be found. The ceremony followed a familiar routine, with only slight variations to the proceedings. The esteemed Admiral Demel would preside over the weddings, and the guest list comprised of distinguished alumni from the military academy and the navy. As the gentle sea breeze drifted through the air, it carried with it the delightful aroma of freshly bloomed flowers and verdant foliage that adorned the surrounding gardens. The Grand Duke, accompanied by his betrothed, made a grand entrance into the ceremony hall, marking the sole divergence from the customary proceedings. Odette, veiled in a diaphanous veil, glided towards Bastian on a bed of sweet summer air. Surprisingly, Grand Duke Rainer displayed an unexpected willingness to cooperate, proving to be an esteemed and sophisticated member of the aristocracy. Despite his initial stubbornness, his demeanor changed when Bastian disclosed the nature of their business dealings with his son. Once he discovered whose fortune was funding the affair, the Grand Duke readily assumed his role as father of the bride. The Grand Duke's lack of true feeling was unimportant as long as he performed his duties, which included presenting the bride as a prominent member of the imperial family and officiating at the solemn marriage ceremony. The bride's regal procession in the Grand Duke's carriage and the groom's vow exchanging with his lover under the guidance of a recognized and esteemed member of the royal family were, in reality, the only components of the occasion that would be remembered. Bastian and his bride took a minute to enjoy the important occasion that lay before them as they approached one another. As he entrusted Bastian with taking care of Odette, the Grand Duke sighed but barely. The warm sunlight that engulfed her delicate palms was in stark contrast to her ice-cold hands. The newlyweds arrived at the podium together, but as they faced one another, Bastian could feel Odette's dread, which was concealed by her veil. As if a modest sacrifice to the gods, she maintained her head bent and concentrated on the shaking bouquet in her hands. But, Bastian had no desire to participate in such a vicious game. Without thinking twice, he pulled back the curtain to unveil her lovely features. He was then rewarded with a view of her breathtaking blue-green eyes, which were wide open with wonder and amazement. Upon seeing her, his lips moved in a smile. The sight of the bride standing before him brought back memories of the spring night when he had unveiled the face of a woman sold to pay off her father's gambling debts. He had taken her discarded fate as his own wife. Bastian was struck by a mixture of amusement and misery, and Odette seemed to share the same emotions as she gradually loosened up. Her lips relaxed into a hesitant, slightly odd smile. A smile as lovely as June, it was. Bastian. Chapter 32, The Reason for Our Divorce. Odette was unable to escape the rumors that had been going around her as the reception came to an end and the celebration party approached. After the intermission, the rumors' real nature emerged, and it was almost beyond belief. Odette leaned in, her curiosity piqued. So, you're saying that their mansions facing each other have the same exact appearance? Countess Trier paused for a moment, as if considering whether to reveal such scandalous information. Finally, she nodded her head, a mischievous glint in her usually composed gray eyes. Their mansions are like identical twins, dear. Can you imagine the audacity of declaring war on each other with such similar abodes? It's a saga worthy of a hero's tale, don't you think? Huh? A soft exhalation escaped Odette's lips, her eyes widening in sudden comprehension. The Clauswitz family's abrupt departure with scowling expressions finally made sense to her. Your attire waits, my lady, the maid whispered, appearing suddenly. She directed Odette's attention towards a beautiful emerald silk gown hanging on the partition. It was the final dress in a set of 3, designed meticulously to match the different events of the day, the ceremony, the reception, and the party. "Make haste," commanded Countess Trier, flicking her wrist before taking a seat by the window, sipping the last dregs of her cocktail. As the summer solstice day grew shorter, Odette got up from her seat, rubbed her face, and followed the maid. A small giggle escaped her lips as the final button was secured as the expert maids carefully assisted her in donning the new gown and undressing. She didn't even appear embarrassed when she looked at her image in the mirror. It was a sight that occurred frequently throughout the ceremony, so the maids swiftly averted their gazes after being taken aback and looking at each other. "Did you wager on a son or a daughter?" With a voice as gentle as the sunset painting the horizon, Odette asked. "So, betting on the gender of the winter baby. I've heard that most people are putting their money on a son. Did everyone just choose the easiest option to win?" As she stood in front of the mirror, admiring her new shoes, the maids lingered around, hesitant to continue dressing her up. Odette tilted her head and glanced down at her shoes. She couldn't help but think about the rumors surrounding her marriage to Bastian Clauswitz. After all, she had been labeled a woman who had used her body to trap him into impregnating her. The rushed wedding date only seemed to add more fuel to the gossip fire. Odette found herself in a surreal situation where her waistline was under constant scrutiny by socialites from across the empire. Even Countess Trier couldn't resist sneaking a suspicious glance at her from time to time. The Countess had even offered to be informed in advance if her wedding dress needed any last-minute adjustments. Despite the insulting rumors, Odette remained unfazed. She knew that the truth would eventually come to light. As the speculation grew more intense, so did the interest of the curious servants and gossiping elites. Nonetheless, assuming that the correct line was maintained. "I apologize if I asked a challenging question." Everyone seemed to have no intention of concealing it, so I reasoned that it would be acceptable for me to participate in the conversation. "It seems like a worthwhile discussion," Odette said mischievously. "I'm sorry, but it's not the way you think it is," the maid said. "I'm sorry if I didn't give you enough time earlier. However, if it's a sensitive topic that you're hesitant to share with me, perhaps it's better to keep it confidential. If I'm not aware of it, I won't make any careless mistakes." "What's your opinion on this matter, head maid?" Odette asked, her eyes scanning the frozen young maids until they landed on the flushed face of the head maid. Every new beginning was accompanied by a phase of trial and error, and this held true for interactions between people as well. The extent to which people were willing to push forward and the point at which we chose to retreat varied greatly from person to person. What would you sacrifice? When would you relent? Because each person's acceptable line was unique. Thus, the key to fostering a healthy relationship lied in establishing clear boundaries. Odette took the initiative to express her limits, and now it was her counterpart's turn to respond. The fate of their amicable relationship hung in the balance, waiting for the answer to unfold. The head maid lowered her head. "Madam is indeed correct." Gone was the defiant air that had previously characterized her attempts to subdue the restless hostess. "Your understanding means a great deal to me. I will strive to avoid such mistakes in the future." With gratitude in her heart, Odette expressed her appreciation. A gentle smile graced her features. She was fully aware that she could not change the other person's mind with words alone and that she had no power over their viewpoint. Her main goal was to maintain the appearance of civility and prevent any unnecessary emotional conflict. Beyond the predetermined line, the other person was in charge of the realm of feelings and concepts. With a deep breath, Odette lifted her gaze, meeting her own reflection in the mirror. The ensuing silence felt oppressive, but it was quickly interrupted as the maids busied themselves with their respective tasks. With swift movements, the maid smoothed out the creases and adjusted the ornate embellishments on her dress before receding discreetly into the background, their task complete. A silent nod of gratitude from Odette conveyed her appreciation for their deft work as the partition was whisked away, the room returning to its former state. Unhurriedly, Odette made her way towards the dressing table, her next set of instructions at hand. The soft click of her shoes on the polished floor echoed through the room, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of fabric as she moved. As one maid deftly touched up Odette's makeup, another worked quickly to perfect her hair and adornments. The finishing touches were being applied to the bride's ensemble, culminating in the placement of a stunning piece of jewelry brought by the maid of honor. "Your help is much appreciated, Dora." And with a gracious nod, Odette turned her attention to Countess Trier, who sat perched on a long chair by the window, observing the goings-on with keen interest. "I am prepared," her voice rang out with serene assurance. The Countess watched the young bride-to-be with satisfaction, and as Odette made her announcement, her countenance brightened into a wide smile. A knowing smile played at the corners of the Countess's lips as she regarded Odette with a keen eye. "Indeed, my dear," she replied. "It appears that way to me as well. Middle colon middle middle colon middle. The master is over there." With impeccable manners, the butler extended a warm welcome to Odette, gesturing in the direction of Bastian's whereabouts. Yet despite the courteous invitation, she remained rooted in place, her gaze fixed upon the man whom she had come to call her husband. Bastian cut a striking figure, his tailored tailcoat and poised demeanor setting him apart from the rest. He stood engrossed in conversation with a companion, the two of them framed against a backdrop of the boundless sea stretching out before them. Odette couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over her, grateful for the excuse to avoid their conversation. As the guest departed, leaving Bastian alone on the balcony, he leaned casually against the railing and retrieved a cigarette. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore provided a soothing backdrop to his solitary moment, as he lost himself in thought and reflection. Odette took a deep breath before starting her leisurely approach to him. She was unsure of the exact terms, but it was clear that she couldn't show any reluctance or hostility towards her spouse. The major goal of this contractual arrangement was to create the picture of an excellent relationship. Odette approached the balcony, then she paused to inquire with gentle politeness, "I hope I'm not disturbing your solitary moment?" Bastian, slowly swiveling around, gestured towards the empty chair beside him, cigarette clutched in his fingers. While not the most chivalrous of invitations, Odette dutifully acquiesced to his request. With the weight of the long and arduous day bearing down on her, Odette shifted restlessly in the silence and finally broke it with a resigned sigh. It had been a very long day. She made a cautious comment to Bastian, who had stayed unnervingly silent, as the late hour had cast a reddish tint on the horizon, a fading memory of the sun's voyage through the sky. Bastian regarded Odette with a gaze that was impossible to decipher, his expression inscrutable as he extended a pack of cigarettes without a word. Odette conveyed her polite refusal with a slight shake of her head before turning away to rest her form against the balcony's railing. As she basked in the warmth of the sun-drenched marble, a weariness that she had managed to push aside throughout the day finally caught up to her, washing over her like a tidal wave. "Do you find it to your liking?" After a long silence had settled between them and the sky above had shifted to a deep blue, Bastian at last uttered his first words. They stood together, side by side, in the tranquil darkness. "I'm sorry, but what precisely are you referring to?" Odette asked him back after a moment's contemplation. Bastian's reserve and aloof gaze, which frequently irked those who conversed with him, were once again on display. "Do you find the residence in which we shall be dwelling for the next couple of years to your liking?" Bastian posed the question as he flicked away the cigarette ashes and drew Odette in closer, enveloping her in his embrace. "Smile, Odette," he commanded her, his voice low and frigid, causing her to momentarily forget the gentleness of his touch. "I simply wish to see the fruits of my investment in you." "Is that too much to ask?" Bastian inquired with a pointed look, gesturing towards the banquet hall that lay beyond the balcony with a sly wink. Odette's heart sank as she surveyed the scene before her. The wedding guests, who had gathered to witness the union of the newlyweds, were shamelessly gawking in her direction. It was in that moment that Odette was painfully reminded of the gravity of the contract she had willingly signed with her own hand. With a small, regretful sigh, Odette turned to him and uttered apologetically, "Please forgive me, Captain. This is my first tea." "Bastian." A voice interrupted, simply but firmly, freezing her words in their tracks like a cool ocean breeze. As the weight of Bastian's correction dawned on her, Odette's expression softened with understanding. She recognized the importance of getting his name right and with a gracious tone, acknowledging her mistake, "I'm sorry, Bastian." With a hesitant smile, Odette paused her attempt to free her hand from her husband's grip. Though she knew she still had much to learn, she reassured him with earnest words, "I know I am not quite there yet, but I am still doing my best. I will try not to disappoint you." Bastian's gaze shifted from her crimson-stained lips to meet her unwavering eyes. Despite her outward tension, her gaze conveyed a sense of firm determination. "By the way, Bastian." With a curious tone, Odette spoke up. Her pronunciation was deliberate and precise, as if she were practicing a new word. "Will this mansion be our permanent residence?" As she awaited his response, the corners of her eyes softened into a gentle fold, an unconscious habit of hers whenever she was lost in thought or questioning something. "Now that my base has moved here, that will be the case. For the time being, though, you will be staying here alone." Bastian replied matter-of-factly. Can you simplify your explanation, please? I have a lot of work to do in Rats, so I will only be able to visit Erdine on weekends for the next month or two. Bastian clarified his schedule. So, we'll only be able to spend weekends together until your work is finished? Odette summarized their arrangement. Exactly. Odette's face lit up with a radiant smile as she nodded in agreement. This expression was a stark contrast to the forced, stiff-lipped smile she had displayed earlier. It seemed that the prospect of living alone in the mansion had brought her great joy. Bastian reassured Odette about the state of the house. Although there are still unfinished parts, there will be no issues with staying here. It would be more fitting for the hostess to oversee the final touches for a more natural look. Of course, I have faith that you will do well on your end. Rest assured, there's nothing for you to worry about. If there are any other concerns, please don't hesitate to let me know, Odette said. Her unwavering assurance and positive attitude were so unexpected that Bastian couldn't help but let out a laugh. You can act as you want as long as it doesn't cause suspicion. I don't see any problems, but please don't bring your family into my house. For my own family, it's the same. If it's your family, do you mean your original family? Odette inquired with caution as she gestured towards the mansion across the bay with a wary gaze. Bastian responded calmly, nodding his head in confirmation. His nonchalant expression was almost surprising, considering the gravity of the situation. It was as if he had simply made a casual statement, rather than declaring war and turning the world upside down. Are you really okay with this mansion, just like the other one? Yes, but isn't this a bit funny? To her surprise, Bastian's next statement was not what she expected. One must be destroyed, Bastian made a quick remark, put out his cigarette, and put it in the trash. The hall was filled with the sound of music. It was now time for the party to begin. Excuse me, Bastian. May I trouble you with another question? Odette hurriedly asked. Bastian nodded in agreement, signified his permission. After 2 years of smooth sailing, what could be the possibly reason for our divorce? Odette inquired with genuine concern. However, Bastian's reaction was unexpected as he burst into laughter, as though he had just heard a ridiculous joke. What do you like? Bastian's question echoed through the room, causing Odette to pause and ponder. She took a moment to gather her thoughts before responding. I'll have to give your question some more thought. Thank you, I think I will be able to spend a pleasant 2 years in this peaceful place that makes me easy to think. Odette concluded the conversation with Bastian in a rush, unwilling to appear foolish. Despite the small smile on his face, Bastian's grip around her waist felt like an iron vice, a reminder of his authority over her. Odette forced herself to comply with her duties as a wife, not daring to show any hint of displeasure. As night descended, they moved with purpose towards the brighter lights of the mansion, shrouded in an air of uncertainty and foreboding. Bastian. Chapter 33, A Surplus Profit. The wind swept into the room, tugging at the edges of the curtains and coaxing them into a gentle dance. Odette stirred from her slumber, her eyes blinking open to the sight of the lace shuddering in the breeze. She lay there for a moment, listening to the rhythmic ebb and flow of the waves outside, tracing the intricate patterns the curtains wove in the air. Gradually, the drowsiness that had clung to her mind melted away, replaced by a sense of peace. This was her sanctuary, a room that overlooked the shimmering expanse of the sea. The walls were painted a soothing shade of blue, and the sheets were as soft as a cloud. As Odette basked in the tranquil atmosphere, her eyes fluttered with the realization of where she was. It was a sensation that coursed through her every morning, a moment of rediscovery that never failed to stir her soul. With a slow and deliberate movement, she rose from the bed and leaned against the headboard, her gaze sweeping over the unfamiliar surroundings of the bedroom. Everything was bathed in a warm and inviting glow, as if the room itself was beckoning her to explore. The space was awash in hues of ivory and gold, a regal and luxurious design that bordered on the excessive. Everywhere she looked, there were beautiful and expensive items that seemed to be vying for her attention. The furniture was ornate and meticulously crafted, while the decorations were intricate and refined. It was as if they were all competing for space, each one clamoring to be the centerpiece of the room. As Odette took it all in, she felt like an uninvited guest who had stumbled into a palace. "Madam," a voice called out, accompanied by the soft rhythm of a knock at the door. "Yes, come in," Odette commanded, swiftly smoothing the ribbon at the end of her braided hair. The door creaked open, revealing the maid who had served her morning tea. In tow was a young maid, her arms laden with the crisp morning paper. The rustling of the paper and the clinking of porcelain cups mingled in the air, as if composing a symphony of domesticity. As Odette caught her breath, A table appeared beside her massive bed, as if by magic. The rich scent of bergamot filled the air as a steaming cup of tea was ceremoniously poured. Odette breathed in the soothing aroma, feeling her worries melt away with each sip. "Thank you, Dora," Odette smiled softly, expressing her gratitude. The head maid responded with a graceful bow, her movements as elegant as a dancer's, before making a quiet exit from the room. The young maid, who had been lingering in the background, quickly stepped forward to take her place beside Odette. "Thank you as well, Molly. You did a wonderful job." As she spoke, the girl's face lit up with joy, her eyes shining with pride. After savoring a sip of her tea, Odette delicately set down the cup before reaching for the newspaper. The pages were still warm from the ironing, their crispness and neatness a testament to the meticulousness of the household staff. Over the past 3 weeks, Odette had established an unspoken signal that she was ready to receive work and reports. "Madam, as your instructions, the dinner table has been arranged on the terrace. Please review the menu and seating arrangements once more to ensure everything is in order." Dora wrapped up her report on the household expenses and the servants' vacation schedules, and then proceeded to present the agenda for the evening's dinner party. As Odette set aside her newspaper, the maid handed over the neatly organized plans. Since the wedding day, life had been a whirlwind of invitations and events, but this particular weekend held a special allure. Bastian's former military academy classmates were the guests of honor, the very same officers who had accompanied him to the gambling house on that fateful night. They had crossed paths at previous social gatherings and weddings, but their interactions had been limited to mere pleasantries. This gathering, however, would be different the first time they would come together with the sole purpose of engaging with each other. "As it stands, proceed with the current arrangement," Odette affirmed, handing back the meticulously reviewed schedule to the head maid with a warm smile. With every action, she embodied the epitome of a sophisticated hostess, dutifully fulfilling the responsibilities outlined in her contract. "Consider it done." Dora completed the task with ease. She bid farewell with a gracious nod before departing. From the moment her first mistake was brought to her attention, the head maid had made a conscious effort to conceal any ill feelings towards her. Odette was quick to recognize the head maid's exceptional service, at least when it came to matters of business. With this in mind, she felt that it wouldn't be difficult to sustain a cordial relationship for the next 2 years if the head maid continued to act with such professionalism. "Madam," as Dora's hand rested on the doorknob, she suddenly pivoted, causing Odette's fingertips to quiver nervously as she toyed with the edge of her teacup. "I received a call from Rats. The butler informed me that the master is running a tad behind schedule today, but he assured me that he'll be here before our guests arrive for the dinner party." "Ah, I understand." As the news sank in, Odette's eyes briefly glazed over, but she quickly composed herself and forced a nod. Despite already being aware of her husband's impending arrival, the notification still managed to stir up a sense of unease within her. It was peculiar, this feeling of nervousness that had suddenly taken hold of her as the weekend approached. After her sense of tranquility restored, Odette settled into her morning routine, perusing the newspaper as she sipped on a warm cup of tea. She had indulged in a light breakfast of hard-boiled egg and fresh fruit, paired with a steaming cup of tea, but the chime of the hour soon signaled that it was time for her to begin tending to her duties as hostess. Odette gently laid the newspaper aside and rose from the bed, making her way towards the balcony that overlooked the stunning garden. Beyond the verdant foliage, the glistening white sand of the beach beckoned invitingly, basking in the warmth of a brilliant summer day. She longed to remain transfixed by the picturesque vista before her, but there was work to be done. Stealing a final glance at the breathtaking scenery, Odette turned on her heel and strode purposefully towards the bathroom. As she opened the window, a salty sea breeze flooded in, carrying with it the soothing sound of the chandelier's mother-of-pearl ornaments swaying in the gentle wind. The melody was almost as enchanting as the view, and she already felt a sense of excitement for the day ahead. With the sound of the sea as her companion, Odette glided towards the sink, entranced by the melody that swirled around her. As she gazed upon the exquisite golden faucet, crafted in the likeness of a swan in mid-flight, a joyous laugh bubbled up from within her, as if it were the very first time she had laid eyes on it. Yet, despite the undeniable splendor of her surroundings, there was an underlying discomfort that gnawed at her heart, casting a shadow over her otherwise idyllic morning routine. Before turning on the water, Odette reached out and tenderly caressed the swan's graceful head, a personal ritual that never failed to calm her nerves and steel her resolve for the day ahead. It was a small moment of tranquility amidst the tumultuous sea of emotions that constantly threatened to engulf her. With a steady hand, Odette twisted the golden faucet, a sense of familiarity washing over her as the cool stream of water began to flow from the swan's peak. Though the doubts and anxieties that plagued her mind refused to dissipate, she held on tightly to the belief that everything would be okay. As the water splashed against her hands, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting the sound of the sea and the gentle sway of the chandelier's mother-of-pearl ornaments carry her away to a place of peace and serenity. Middle. Formerly possessed by the wealthiest denizens of the New World, the financial institution stood at a strategic juncture between the stock exchange and the central bank. Bastian strode purposefully out of the company's grand entrance, a marked departure from his previous stealthy ingress and egress through the obscure back door during lulls in pedestrian traffic. As pedestrians paused in their tracks and stole a glimpse, their eyes widened in astonishment. Despite the revelation of the true identity of the wealthy mogul who had emerged as the deity of the empire's financiers, there were still many who remained incredulous, long after the news had broken. As for the rest of the developments, we'll keep you informed through both written correspondence and phone updates, the silver-maned executive stated as he saw Bastian off at the base of the staircase. No. Bastian shook his head with a composed smile. Matters that have already been settled can move forward under the board's discretion. Thomas Moeller, formerly the secretary to Bastian's maternal grandfather, had assumed significant responsibilities since the days when Illis was deemed nothing more than a mere moneylender. He served as Bastian's mentor and proved himself to be a highly capable individual, whose contributions were vital to the rapid and stable growth of the company. Without him, the company would have faltered. With gracious expressions of appreciation and unwavering trust, Bastian exchanged polite pleasantries with Thomas Moeller before sliding into the driver's seat and starting the ignition. Just as he had set his jacket down on the passenger seat, Thomas knocked gently on the window pane. Thomas Moeller, the ever-austere mentor, spoke with a tinge of redness in his eyes. It was your grandfather's lifelong aspiration to create a thriving company and be acknowledged globally. You should be immensely proud of yourself, Bastian. I know I am. As his companion's emotional state grew more apparent, Bastian quipped with a wry grin, "You're making me uneasy. Perhaps our esteemed director is getting on in years." He paused for a moment. "But don't let age catch up to you. Time is an unstoppable force. In any case, do your best. Keep me in check until the day we can proudly proclaim ourselves to be the most esteemed company in this metropolis," Bastian urged with a determined glint in his eyes. Thomas Moeller's frown soon gave way to a gentle smile that sounds like a mixture of worry and warning. With a step back, Bastian slid behind the wheel and started the car. Rather than heading towards the city center, where his townhouse stood, he charted a course towards the new residence where his wife was staying. As it was still early evening and the night's festivities had yet to commence in full swing, he was able to depart the bustling city center at a quicker pace than usual. As the desolate outskirts loomed into view, he expertly shifted gears and accelerated with a fierce determination. After driving northward for what seemed like ages, the vast expanse of the sea finally came into view, beckoning to him like an old friend. With unwavering conviction, he had made the decision to launch a swift and decisive campaign. At first, Bastian had planned to unveil his grand scheme after officially sealing the marriage contract with Levere. But the course of events took a sharp turn when the Emperor presented a marriage proposal and a business deal that he couldn't refuse. Of course, the unforeseen meteoric rise of the company's growth rate also played a major role in shaping his decisions. Perfect planning was required in order to avoid wasting the once-in-a-lifetime chance to conduct business with the Emperor. The best way to lay the groundwork before leaving for his next assignment was to adopt the most aggressive tactic. Duke Levere coveted the title, but Bastian was unwilling to give it up in exchange for a prosperous life. His modest nod was only a short-term solution to reduce background noise. Nonetheless, the time was marked by great turmoil and change. Glories of the past were no longer a guarantee for the future. Aristocrats who refrained from joining the capitalist revolution saw their standing rapidly deteriorate. There would soon be an end to the time when people enjoyed honor solely based on genealogy. Bastian was a pragmatist at heart, recognizing gains and losses. Its precise computations and figures have created a perfect and faultless universe. There would be the ability to establish the next era's ruler. Bastian meant to take it by the heads and stand on it. Of course, there was no reason to ignore the fact that class influence was still a major factor. In a sense, it was like surplus profit. Having it is preferred, but not having it is still acceptable. Bastian sped down the familiar road, the wind whipping through his hair as he headed towards his new kingdom. When he approached the entrance of the luxurious mansion, he couldn't help but ponder the idea of developing the picturesque site on the other side of the bay as a breathtaking resort. It would be the perfect addition to his expanding empire, a paradise for the elite to bask in the beauty of nature and indulge in the finest luxuries. Odette stood at the front door in her usual spot, just like the previous weekend. Her posture and expression remained unchanged, the only variation being her attire. Bastian relinquished the steering wheel to the valet and ascended the stairs, wearing a grin worthy of a husband who had been longing for his wife's company for an entire week. Odette's countenance was equally affectionate, exuding the demeanor of a devoted wife who had eagerly awaited her husband's return. As Bastian stepped into the mansion, Odette rushed towards him, to make it look like she was indeed waiting for her beloved husband before the maids. "Welcome home, I missed you a lot," said Odette. "I missed you too." Bastian clasped his wife's hand in a courteous response, returning the sentiment of missing her. And with a deliberate volume, he addressed the curious servants who were surreptitiously observing, "My thoughts have been consumed by you in your absence. I hope you share the same sentiments, my dear." "Yes, of course." With a subtle tremble in her eyes, Odette managed to fabricate a convincing lie. It was a remarkable improvement from the first time when she had been as stiff as a board. Bastian put the finishing touch on their little performance by planting a delicate kiss on Odette's rosy cheek. With the way they acted, anyone could have easily believed they were a young couple deeply in love, cherishing their newlywed phase. He strode into the grand lobby, the weight of his successful business deal settling heavily on his shoulders. As he made his way towards the living quarters, the sound of his footsteps intertwined with that of his young wife Odette's, creating a harmonious melody that reverberated through the opulent mansion. The lazy stillness of the summer afternoon was shattered by their synchronized steps, a reminder of the vitality and vigor that fueled the couple's passionate pursuits. Bastian. Chapter 34, Leave the thinking to me. Bastian's eyes flickered over the dress, evaluating it with a critical gaze, before he posed the question in a composed tone, "Is that the best you can come up with?" Odette turned to her husband and furrowed her brow in confusion. It took her a beat to decipher Bastian's intended message, and she attributed her momentary lapse to his unfeeling gaze and detached demeanor. Despite his previous displays of affection, he was now critiquing her in the same impassive manner he had adopted when playing the role of a devoted husband. "Without a doubt. I think it's perfect for the dinner party," Odette declared with unshakable confidence. The dress may not have been ostentatious, but it exuded an air of sophistication and refinement that perfectly suited her personal taste. In fact, even Countess Trier, the esteemed designer who had crafted the garment, shared the same belief. Bastian's eyes honed in on the delicate pearl earrings that adorned Odette's lobes, and a note of disbelief crept into his voice. "Surely, you don't mean to tell me that of all the jewelry I've gifted you, these are the only adornments that have caught your fancy?" His query hung in the air, his tone laced with a tinge of disappointment as he observed the simplicity of Odette's chosen accessories. "Bastian, your jewelry is undeniably stunning, so I'm afraid an excessive embellishments would do this dress a disservice," Odette replied without missing a beat. Once again, she stood firm in her stance, unwilling to compromise on her vision of elegance and simplicity. "Ah, you think?" Bastian rose from his seat and echoed his wife's words. The fading light of the summer sun cast a warm glow over Odette's room, painting the space in hues of amber and gold that contrasted starkly with the palpable tension between the couple. The atmosphere between them was charged, heavy with unspoken words and a current of air that crackled with unexpressed emotions. "Is it your belief that I'm asking about your opinion?" Bastian asked, his tone indicating a hint of irritation. "And if that's not the case?" Odette countered. Bastian's footsteps halted abruptly, just one step away from her. "Your thoughts hold no interest for me, Odette. I am commanding you to discard that unsatisfactory ensemble and choose something more fitting." The silence that followed was palpable, the air thick with unspoken tension as the weight of his edict hung heavily in the room. Odette's eyes fluttered shut as she took a deep breath, gathering her courage to speak her mind. "I selected this attire with our guests for tonight in mind. You see, they were present on that fateful night, the very first time we met, and they bore witness to my past. They know everything." "And what of it?" Bastian retorted. "I vow that an overly extravagant and flamboyant attire would not only appear ridiculous but could also harm my reputation. Instead, I believe that projecting a humble and dignified image would be more effective in upholding my prestige." Despite feeling wounded and disheartened, Odette maintained her composure, while Bastian attentively observed her with a steely gaze. Odette was taken aback by the enigmatic smirk that crept across his lips, leaving her further bewildered. Your reasoning may be plausible, but I doubt it will have any impact. After all, who would concern themselves with the dignity of a woman who was sold off to settle her father's gambling debts? Bastian's words landed like a crushing blow, yet he delivered them with a cool detachment. Regardless of what clothes you wear, you'll only end up looking foolish, he added, tilting his head. A gentle sigh escaped his lips and brushed against Odette's ashen cheek, leaving her feeling utterly devastated. Then why are you insisting that I change my clothes if you think that way? Odette shot back with a slow, dazed blink of her eyes. I must demonstrate to you, unequivocally, how your circumstances have altered. So you're worried about the possibility of a phony wife appearing comical, but you can't bear the thought of your wealth being threatened? Odette's voice rang out, tinged with a hint of bitterness. Bastian cast a fleeting glance towards her reddened eyes before pivoting and making his way back to his seat with a measured stride. Resuming his seat, he heaved a drawn-out sigh, laced with irritation. While he acknowledged her astute intellect, there were moments when she displayed a surfeit of knowledge coupled with a naivete that seemed particularly pronounced in matters concerning honor and dignity. Bastian raised his head and leaned heavily on the wingback of the chair. He purchased that lady. He had to be aware of how this marriage worked. Until the contractual agreement was terminated, she was solely his property. With a disdainful disregard for anything that he deemed unworthy of his affluence, he refused to tolerate even the slightest hint of cheapness in his possessions. Thus, it was imperative that she appeared as the epitome of elegance and beauty, surpassing even the most illustrious women in the world. This was crucial to ensure that no one dared to detect even the faintest vestiges of the detested beggar princess in Bastian Clauswitz's wife. Save your thoughts for another day, Bastian advised with the demeanor of a doting husband who relished the joys of married life. Leave the thinking to me. Your sole responsibility is to comply with the orders that I've conceived and issued. Surely, my wife hasn't forgotten that we're bound by a contract, right? His eyes narrowed as he glanced at the desk clock, indicating that it was now time for the guests to commence their arrival. If your memory has failed you, do not hesitate to inform me. I do not mind revisiting the contract once more, Bastian said in a measured tone. I do not believe it is necessary for you to go through such great lengths, Odette replied calmly, her eyes welling up with transparent tears that shimmered like the turquoise sea. Despite the emotional turmoil stirring within her, she refused to shed a single tear. Rather, her countenance conveyed a sense of calm rationality, contrasting starkly with her initial conversation with him. Excellent. Then it appears that we have reached a conclusion, Bastian remarked, his smile graceful as he regarded his conversational partner with a measure of satisfaction. Odette, I am issuing a command. Change your clothes immediately, he stated firmly, his tone brooking no argument any further. Middle. Lucas struggled to open his mouth, his anxiety apparent. That's the thing. He finally managed to say, his words causing a stir among the young Clauswitz couple who had just arrived to greet the last guest. The couple looked at Lucas's companion with a mixture of surprise and curiosity, while the other guests who had already arrived and were engaged in conversation also took notice of the sudden disruption. I'm sorry, Bastian. I wish I could have told you earlier, but unfortunately, Emma was unwell today, and I had no choice but to take care of her. You understand, right? As for the event, it wouldn't have been appropriate for me to attend alone, so I asked Sandrine to come with me. She happened to have no plans either, so it worked out well. I hope you're not upset about it. Lucas opened his eyes and began to rapidly fire off the excuses he had prepared earlier, hoping to assuage any concerns. Sandrine calmly waited for her turn to speak, apologizing with a friendly smile. Captain, would it be possible for me to take Lucas' fiancé's place? With a hopeful expression, Sandrine turned to Captain Clauswitz and asked. Despite her bold tone, her heart raced with nervous anticipation as she awaited his response. Of course. Bastian replied with practiced ease, donning his social smile once again. Welcome, Countess Lennart, he added, extending a gracious welcome to Sandrine. Though he had already seen through her request, Bastian was glad to oblige. As Sandrine stepped into the parlor, she felt a wave of joy wash over her, replacing the feelings of hatred and resentment she had harbored towards him in the past. She greeted Bastian with the grace and elegance befitting a distinguished guest. As Sandrine surveyed the familiar faces gathered at the dinner party, she couldn't help but notice how Mrs. Clauswitz stood out. With a gracious smile, Sandrine approached her and began the conversation with a fitting compliment. "Mrs. Clauswitz, you look even more beautiful since the last time I saw you." "The captain is truly fortunate to have such a stunning wife," Sandrine said, her words flowing effortlessly. It wasn't difficult to pay Mrs. Clauswitz a compliment. After all, she shone brighter and radiated even more beauty than before she married Bastian. "Thank you, Countess. You are stunning as always," Odette replied graciously. Sandrine noticed her delicate diamond earrings that glinted on Odette's earlobes. The same jewels adorned her slender neck, adding to her radiance. Sandrine admired how incredible Odette looked, considering the difficult circumstances she had faced just a few months ago. Sandrine's soaring elation was quickly dashed, plunging her into the depths of despair once again. Though Bastian was not a miserly man by nature, the extravagance of the situation seemed excessive to her. She struggled to maintain her smile, but the news of dinner being ready provided a welcome distraction. Sandrine looked on as Odette gracefully rose to her feet, holding her husband's hand. An involuntary sigh escaped her lips as she watched the couple depart, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. Odette's dress was a sight to behold, its deep blue hue reminiscent of the vast, shimmering expanse of the night sea. The hem was adorned with imitation stones that twinkled like stars, intricately interwoven with silver threads. The level of care taken to attach and embroider each piece was evident, and the price tag of the dress must have been equivalent to that of a small fortune's worth of jewels. Even the officers, who were largely ignorant of women's clothing, couldn't help but steal glances at Bastian's stunning wife, their eyes widened with astonishment. It was a testament to Odette's beauty and elegance that she could command such attention with her mere presence. Odette exuded an air of aloofness that seemed to shield her from the gazes of others, even though she undoubtedly understood their meaning. Bastian, who was escorting his radiant wife, was equally unfazed by the attention they garnered. Sandrine was entranced, unable to take her eyes off the couple as they made their way to the terrace where the dining table was set. It was as if they were a pair of celestial beings, walking amongst mortals. The subtle flicker of candlelight only served to enhance their otherworldly aura, and Sandrine found herself completely spellbound. 2 years. Yet, Sandrine's jealousy burned as hotly as ever, despite knowing that the woman would eventually be abandoned. Her emotions defied all reason and logic, controlling her heart with an iron grip. Thankfully, the start of dinner brought an unexpected distraction in the form of Princess Isabel. The royal had made a scandalous spectacle of herself at a recent ball, shocking the entire social world with her outrageous behavior. Sandrine found herself grateful for the diversion, as it provided a welcome respite from her own turbulent thoughts. Indeed, it was a divine act of mercy. Middle. The sky was a canvas of vibrant colors as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting an otherworldly glow over the sea. Odette stood mesmerized by the view, her gaze fixed on the breathtaking scene. The flickering candles and shimmering glass lanterns that adorned the terrace only added to the enchanting atmosphere of the midsummer night. The feast was a true triumph, despite Sandrine's initial concerns. Each dish was carefully crafted, and the guests savored every bite with delight. Even those who had initially regarded Sandrine with suspicion couldn't help but be impressed by the culinary skills on display. As the night progressed, Sandrine found herself settling into a sense of contentment. The candlelight cast a warm glow across the faces of the guests, and the air was filled with the sound of laughter and easy conversation. Odette, too, seemed to be enjoying herself, though Sandrine could sense a hint of tension lurking beneath her composed facade. But as the night wore on, a sudden interruption shattered the peaceful atmosphere. Bastian received an urgent phone call, and with a look of regret, he excused himself from the table. The jovial chatter of the guests died down in his absence, leaving a palpable sense of unease in its wake. "I've been told that Duke Diessen suffered serious injuries. How is his health lately?" I asked because we have met before and I am genuinely concerned. One of the officers, who shared furtive glances with his colleagues, posed a question that seemed genuinely empathetic. The name that echoed in her mind was that of Eric Faber, the very same officer who had subjected Odette to crude and vulgar language, if her memory was accurate. His condition has improved considerably, although mobility remains a challenge. "Thank you for your kind inquiry, Captain Faber," Odette replied. As soon as she finished speaking, a wave of laughter swept through the guests. It was an unbecoming display of vulgarity among such esteemed company. Odette's fingers curled around the stem of her wine glass, her grip firm and unyielding. As she scanned the faces of the guests around her, it became apparent that Bastian's warning had been justified. Despite her best efforts, they were all laughing at her expense, their mirth a cruel reminder of the fragile alliances that governed the social world. It was clear that their kindness had been nothing more than a facade, a pretense put on for Bastian's benefit. It's fortunate that the Duke has recovered, isn't it? After all, he was able to gift Mrs. Clauswitz with such luxury because of that deal he made that night. It's almost as if he deserves to live a long life for being such a generous father. Eric's voice dripped with sarcasm as he spoke. Hey, Eric. Lucas, the son of Count Havald, caught Eric Faber's attention with a soft call, though it appeared Eric was considering halting regardless. What could have possibly happened that night to make it so intriguing? Do tell us, won't you? She joked. It was Sandrine, who was observing the scene with leisure, causing the spark of the malice. Sandrine's plea fell on deaf ears as her gaze remained fixed on Odette. The sea, which once glimmered with the light of the disappearing sun, now seemed to have absorbed a fragment of the encroaching darkness. Bastian. Chapter 35, Blue Wick in the Flames. My father. She began. In a moment of startling honesty, Odette's clear voice cut through the thick tension in the room. My father had an insatiable gambling addiction. He was willing to risk anything, even his own flesh and blood, to feed his habit. And so, he wagered me as the stakes, and eager participants eagerly joined in the game. The weight of her revelation hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, silence reigned supreme. With a deep frown etched on his face, Eric Faber watched on as Bastian's wife took center stage, stealing his chance to be the main character. Despite the humiliation she was subjected to, she remained surprisingly composed, exuding an air of unshakable calmness that even Eric left dumbfounded. The performance was nothing short of spectacular, leaving him awestruck and feeling foolish for having made such a fuss over something so trivial. Bastian emerged as the winner of that bet, and he graciously allowed me to leave unscathed, with all the dignity and honor befitting of a soldier. It was only made possible because of the firm support of his friends, for which I am eternally grateful. With a grateful smile on her lips, Odette recounted the events that had transpired. Eric laughed in sheer amazement as he listened to her cleverly beautified version of events, which, to his surprise, worked in her favor. Though it wasn't entirely accurate, the fact that it wasn't entirely wrong perplexed him even more. Despite his reservations, he couldn't deny that she had won, and her stunning counterattack had left him reeling, unable to come up with a suitable response. How utterly romantic, Sandrine exclaimed, unable to contain her exaggerated admiration. It sounds like it must have been love at first sight. Setting down her glass, she gazed at Odette with a mixture of awe and envy, leaving Eric feeling somewhat uncomfortable in her presence. Sensing the awkwardness, he quickly excused himself and withdrew quietly. All eyes were fixed on Sandrine as she regarded Odette with a sharp, scrutinizing gaze. Though Odette appeared to be humble and unassuming, Sandrine couldn't help but wonder if her apparent lack of arrogance was just a facade. Perhaps it would have been better if Odette's arrogance was sky-high, but Sandrine couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this seemingly soft-hearted woman than met the eye. As Sandrine continued to study Odette, she couldn't help but notice the desperation in her calm demeanor. If there was truly nothing to hide, then why was Odette so intent on maintaining her composure? It was a question that lingered in Sandrine's mind long after the conversation had ended, leaving her with an unshakable sense of intrigue and curiosity. Who knows, perhaps your husband might be a different man if someone else had won that fateful night. Sandrine's smile broadened as she lobbed a taunt disguised as a joke at Odette. She was determined to rattle Odette's seemingly unflappable composure, to see how long she could keep up her facade of calm and control. But as she watched Odette's expression remain unchanged, Sandrine began to wonder if there was more to this woman than she had initially thought. Surely everyone should have worked harder to seize such a golden opportunity, should they not, Mrs. Clauswitz? She taunted, her eyes glittering with malicious delight. As Sandrine continued to poke and prod at Odette, the tension in the room grew palpable, and the once excited guests fell silent, their laughter fading away into a tense hush. Sandrine let out a soft, wistful sigh and followed the direction of everyone's gaze, her eyes settling on the terrace where Bastian stood, his sudden appearance taking her by surprise. Middle. The heavy silence that had settled over the garden was abruptly shattered by the sound of footsteps echoing through the night air. With a faint, enigmatic smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, Bastian moved steadily towards his wife, moving with a fluid grace that spoke of years of military training. The conversation with Thomas Muller was unusually brief, with key points summarized in straightforward answers from Bastian. But upon returning to the terrace, a tense situation awaited as Eric was on the verge of detonating a figurative bomb. Curiosity piqued, Bastian chose to carefully observe the unfolding events before taking action. With Odette put on the chopping block, Bastian's curiosity was piqued as he eagerly awaited to see which path she would choose. It was a test of sorts, and unfortunately, the outcome did not meet Bastian's expectations. While the strategy itself was solid, Odette's lack of skill left a gap that Sandrine was able to expertly exploit. Sandrine possessed the very qualities of a wife that Bastian required, and it was a testament to her character. The current Mrs. Clauswitz was Odette, however, and the preservation of her dignity was intimately tied to Bastian's honor as a husband. I'm afraid that scenario simply wouldn't have come to pass. A soft smile played across Bastian's lips as he stood behind Odette's chair, exuding an air of possessiveness as he wrapped his arms around her shoulders. Even if someone else had emerged victorious, the end result would have remained unchanged. I would have simply stolen it, Bastian declared, turning to look lovingly at his wife. Leaning in close, he whispered affectionately into her ear. Odette's head whipped around in shock, and an involuntary gasp escaped her lips as she found herself face to face with her husband. His proximity was unnerving, and even as he feigned the role of a tender lover, the frigidity in his gaze remained unyielding. It was like staring into the heart of a flickering flame. Caught off guard, Odette felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her as she attempted to turn her head away. But the hands that clutched her shoulders held firm, and before she knew it, their lips encountered. Suppressing a scream, Odette stiffened as Bastian suddenly kissed her. Despite the crude laughter and taunts of the other guests, she couldn't help but feel grateful for their presence. Their rowdy behavior had provided the perfect cover for the explosion of emotions that threatened to consume her. Thankfully, Bastian knew when to draw the line and withdrew without overstepping his bounds. He took his seat with a smile on his face, emitting a nonchalance that fit right back into the original course of the dinner party. No one mentioned that night at all as they instead relished in their conversation, laughter, and the delights of the June evening. Even the obviously malicious Eric Faber and Countess Lennart contributed to the laid-back mood. A sense of relief washed over Odette as she exhaled deeply. However, her moment of respite was short-lived, as she suddenly felt a large, firm grip enveloping her hand. The hand belonged to Bastian. Despite her attempts to resist, his grasp remained unyielding as he gently guided her hand onto his lap. As Sandrine observed the newlyweds closely, she couldn't help but feel a tinge of envy bubble up inside her. Despite her mixed emotions, she plastered on a bright smile and delivered a backhanded compliment with expert precision. My, I must say I didn't expect to witness such a display of love from you, Bastian. You and Odette make such a lovely couple, she remarked, her words dripping with both sweetness and spite. Although her smile remained fixed, her eyes betrayed a hint of jealousy that she had no intention of concealing. A sudden warmth crept up Odette's cheeks as she came to the realization of just how peculiar her marriage truly was. It was a feeling akin to being treated as a mistress by another man's wife, and it left her with a sense of discomfort that she couldn't quite shake off. However, Bastian still seemed unwilling to let her go, a fact that left her feeling both bewildered and conflicted. Even though it was painfully obvious that Sandrine harbored deep feelings for him. Bastian applied a strong pressure to Odette's gripped hand. Then he cautiously wound his fingers around her immovable ones. She made every effort to oppose it, but the strength gap was too great. Their hands soon formed a flawless interlock. As an unfamiliar sensation crept up on her, Odette felt her face flush with embarrassment. Hastily lowering her head in an attempt to hide her rosy cheeks, she couldn't help but feel a sense of shame wash over her. Despite her inner turmoil, Bastian carried on with his conversation as if nothing were amiss, leaving her feeling lost and alone. Unable to meet Sandrine's gaze for the duration of the meal, Odette was consumed by a gnawing sense of guilt, as though she were betraying something sacred. The feeling was a repulsive one, casting a dark shadow deep within her heart that seemed impossible to shake off. Middle. There are still quite a few parts of the house that require the touch of a skilled hostess, Sandrine's voice rang out merrily, her words echoing through the stillness of the hallway. Pausing for a moment to clarify, Odette pivoted on her heel to face the group of ladies following her, her eyes sparkling with amusement. Following the conclusion of the evening meal, Bastian and his companions made their way to the study, leaving her to take charge of the ladies' entertainment. While refreshments and music were typically the go-to options for such occasions, Odette decided to take a different approach. Seeking counsel from the esteemed Countess Trier, it was determined that a house tour would be a more fitting choice for their inaugural hosting event. Indeed, the guest quarters and shared spaces have yet to be fully adorned, and the outbuilding is nearly complete, with only the exterior awaiting its final touches. A warm smile graced Odette's lips as she replied. Sandrine, acknowledging Odette's response with a nod of her head, brazenly pushed open the door at the end of the hallway, revealing a cozy study designed for the hostess to receive and entertain her guests. With a sense of ownership, Sandrine entered the space with a swagger. While doing so, the other visitors dispersed around the corner, avidly taking in the splendor of the mansion. Odette motioned to the waiting maid, who immediately brought the group back to the terrace when she saw Sandrine there. Odette, however, was left with no choice other than to follow Sandrine inside the inviting study. Sandrine looked over the still empty cabinets and walls before settling down on the sofa in front of the big fireplace. Odette softly shut the door as she observed the situation. It appeared that a conversation she didn't particularly enjoy was about to begin. The trending painting styles these days are far too vague for my liking. Sandrine arched her eyebrow as Odette drew closer, her tone conveying her disapproval of contemporary art. I much prefer classic paintings, although themes like history and religion can be a bit weighty. Personally, I prefer bright and lively landscape paintings. With a pointed stare, Sandrine made her preferences clear. Rather than a painting, I would suggest a mirror atop the fireplace, she instructed. And for the lamp and clock on the mantelpiece, I would choose Philae's. Burke's pieces lack the necessary delicate aesthetic. I spent my childhood in Philia, so you should be able to understand my taste. Odette's face contorted with confusion as she gazed down at Sandrine, who was standing on the opposite side of the sofa. I don't understand what you're talking about, Countess. The lanterns cast a soft glow on the two women as they locked eyes, their expressions starkly contrasting. Please remember to maintain the decorum of a guest. Odette was the first to break the silence, her tone firm but polite. I will maintain appearances in public to spare Bastian's shame. But let me make this clear, I have no intention of accepting a mere 2-year employee as my Bastian's wife, especially in private. Sandrine cut to the chase and made her position clear, no longer interested in playing games of tug-of-war. Surprised, my dear? Did you truly believe that the marriage contract was a secret only shared between you and Bastian? Her words were like a dagger, cutting through the silence as Odette's eyes conveyed her shock and confusion. I understand. Countess, you may have a disillusion of a special relationship with him. It's amusing, but I get it. Bastian is also taking advantage of you, and young men need that kind of entertainment, above all, Odette said. Her pallid hand caught Sandrine's attention. Even the last sliver of sympathy she had for the lady who had sold herself for money vanished when she thought back to Bastian clutching that hand firmly. I do hope you're taking the necessary precautions and being cautious. What do you mean by that? Odette's expression turned pale as she asked back. Let me be clear, Odette. You should not entertain the thought of getting pregnant and trying to replace me. While I may tolerate your presence to some extent, if you were to have a child with Bastian, you would face a world of pain and heartbreak. You can't be serious. Are you trying to threaten me? Odette's mask of politeness crumbled as she exclaimed. What else might there be in this discussion? Sandrine gave a nonchalant shrug and a small smile, as if to say that there was nothing left to discuss in the conversation. Odette seemed to have finally understood what fate saved for her. Bastian. Chapter 36, Odette's Business. The serene tranquility of dawn was suddenly disrupted by a gentle yet distinct tapping sound that caught Odette's attention as she was absent-mindedly gazing into the mirror while brushing her hair. She turned her head in surprise, wondering who or what could be causing the commotion. Just as she was about to collect her thoughts, another knock echoed through the stillness, but this time it came from an unexpected direction, the passageway that led to the couple's bedroom. In a flash of realization, Odette swiftly rose from her seat, anticipating the arrival of someone she knew. And as if on cue, a familiar voice broke through the silence, confirming her suspicions. Odette. Bastian called her out from behind the door. Please come in. Odette welcomed Bastian and scurried to tidy up her disheveled dressing table, ensuring everything was in its proper place. With one final adjustment, she carefully returned the violet cream to its designated spot, and in that moment, the door, which appeared nearly camouflaged against the wall, began to creak open. And there, emerging from the other side, stood Bastian, garbed in a stunning blue-gray gown that draped elegantly around him, exuding a refined aura that was impossible to ignore. Odette found herself standing still, unsure of what to do next, while uncertainty hung in the air. "Please tell, what seems to be the matter?" she asked hesitantly. The door had never been opened before, despite the fact that they had spent several weekends together. Contrary to her, who found it puzzling, Bastian appeared utterly uninterested. As he stood frozen in his tracks, his gaze fixed on Odette, he halted his journey from the dressing table to the bed. The color of his hair seemed deeper than usual, as though it had recently been drenched in a shower. The loose-fitting gown he wore clung slightly to his skin, revealing lingering droplets of moisture, glistening in the light. Against his vulnerable and unkempt state, his eyes remained frigid and unyielding, as if they were impervious to any emotion. The stillness of his gaze lingered on for what seemed like an eternity, leaving Odette feeling both uneasy and exposed. Even with her best efforts to project confidence, she found herself retreating, almost as if she could physically feel the weight of his piercing stare. It was a peculiar sensation, like grains of sand that had been heated by the scorching sun trickling down her skin. Bastian's gaze traveled slowly from the tips of Odette's slipper-clad toes, up to her clasped hands, and finally settled on her flushed face. Without a word, he turned and made his way over to the tea table by the window, where he took a seat. It wasn't until then that Odette began to understand the source of his discontent. The expression etched on his face was unmistakably one of displeasure. Odette let out a sharp gasp as she finally dared to draw a breath and turned around. The sight that greeted her in the mirror was enough to make her almost scream in surprise, causing her to quickly cover her mouth with her hand. Reflected in the glass was her figure, clad only in white muslin pajamas that left little to the imagination. Every contour of her body was on full display through the sheer fabric. In a sudden panic, Odette hastily clasped her hands over her chest and scanned the room with a dazed expression. Her gown lay within reach on the bed bench, but the mere thought of crossing the room to retrieve it in front of her husband, who may as well have been staring directly through her, made her feel as if she were standing there naked. Just look away for a second," Odette struggled to open her mouth and spoke in a trembling voice. She knew that what she was about to say might make her appear weak, but she saw no other way out of this awkward situation. Bastian laughed and sighed while gazing at Odette with his arms relaxed. Fortunately, despite his apparent shock, he showed enough consideration to glance out the window. Odette didn't approach the bed bench until that point. She felt even more ashamed after tightly draping a garment over her body. How could she be more concerned about her messy table? It was completely absurd. "Thank you, I'm done," Odette muttered softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Her heart raced as she fought the urge to flee from the room, but she tried her best to appear strong and determined. Bastian turned his head slowly, his expression unchanged from before. His displeasure was certain, and Odette could feel it like a heavy weight pressing down on her. "Please sit." Bastian motioned for Odette to take a seat, his hand flicking away a few strands of hair that had fallen across his forehead. "There's something we need to discuss about the dinner party," he said, his tone as cold and callous as ever. Odette's professional demeanor was greatly appreciated. It was undoubtedly the case, at least for the time being. Middle. Against the trembling of her fingers subsiding, Odette continued to clutch the gown tightly, her knuckles turning white from the force of her grip. Bastian watched her silently, noting the extreme tension in her body. Odette had already shown him everything, so he didn't understand why she was clinging to the robe so firmly. He knew it would be pointless, so he didn't bother to say anything about it. He didn't want to waste any more time waiting for a disoriented and perplexed woman because it was already late at night. Bastian wasted no time getting to the point. "I didn't bring you here to play the role of an elegant princess," he said bluntly, his tone cutting like a knife. Odette blinked in surprise, her eyes locked onto Bastian's face. "Could you explain it to me so that I can understand? You married a commoner, Odette," his voice laced with disdain. "And as a commoner's wife, you are now also a commoner." A steely glint flashed in Odette's eyes as she held Bastian's gaze. "I am well aware of that." "Are you?" A sly smile played on Bastian's lips as he leaned in towards her. "Then perhaps it's time you started acting like it. Would it be clear if I said that I didn't want to see the pitiful woman who was crushed and eaten in pieces in the hands of acting respectably? I apologize for my response at the dinner table. I was taken aback and caught off guard. However, I can't agree with the idea of abandoning my class consciousness," Odette shouted, her voice steady despite the flush on her cheeks. "I made my judgment based on my own thoughts and beliefs, not on my social status." "Thought." As the word left her lips, Odette's eyes lit up with a glimmer of delight. Regardless of my birth or marital status, I am still myself. And I believe I fulfilled my duties as a gracious host tonight. Her inner turmoil was overwhelming, yet she refused to back down without a fight. She gritted her teeth, determined to keep her composure in the face of the man's friends and lover. Their contemptuous sneers and insults had stung like bee stings, but she refused to let them see her pain. For Odette, it was all about keeping a promise, fulfilling a responsibility. She couldn't afford to let her position slip away, not when she had fought so hard to get here. Even as they treated her like a common prostitute, she maintained her poise and dignity, clinging to the manners of the Diessen family. With the weight of duty on her shoulders, Odette gazed out at the endless expanse of the night sea, holding back tears that threatened to spill over. She couldn't let Bastian see her weakness. This was all just part of the contract, after all. But as she struggled to bear the burden of her responsibilities as Mrs. Clauswitz, she couldn't help but feel the ache in her heart. It was a pain born of the realization that she was not yet accustomed to carrying the weight of things that were not truly hers to bear. "Do you always hold such a high opinion of yourself?" Bastian's voice was laced with a hint of amusement as he questioned Odette. "I'll only show appreciation for things that are worthy of it." Odette squared her shoulders and met Bastian's gaze, her anger palpable. With time, she knew she would adapt to the situation at hand. Time had given her only one gift, but it was enough. She had become accustomed to the discomfort and found solace in it. "I don't put any stock in the word of the woman who has forgotten the advice I gave her earlier tonight." The air between them crackled with tension as Bastian reclined in his chair, his expression unreadable. "You need not worry about that. Your thoughts are yours, and I will make sure to remember them," Odette assured. "You know that, so why you're disregarding my advice? The advice you provided earlier was solely for the benefit of Mrs. Clauswitz's business. When the time comes for me to act as your wife, I will strive to align with your beliefs. And what about now? Would it be appropriate to call it as Odette's business?" Odette, who was having trouble, posed an odd query. It didn't appear like she was attempting to make a joke out of it, judging by the sincerity of her look, which lacked any indication of humor. Bastian's laughter echoed through the room as he finally understood Odette's solution. The woman before him, once so composed and reserved, now held her breath with anticipation. It was as if a new side of her was emerging, a side that wasn't afraid to take risks and find unconventional solutions. Bastian couldn't help but marvel at this new Odette. Nothing else, just Odette. Bastian let out a deep, slow breath as his laughter subsided, and his eyes fixed on his wife with a blank expression. The memories of the dinner and the irritation caused by her disapproval swirled in his mind, but he tried to push them aside. In the face of his best efforts, he couldn't help but be struck by her unyielding presence. Stripped of all artifice, she was simply stunning, and Bastian felt his resolve falter in the face of her beauty. Bastian gazed intently at the gown in Odette's hand, his eyes settling on the wedding ring adorning her finger. "So, when do you plan on resuming your duties as my wife?" "In the eyes of those who believe I am your wife, I will be Mrs. Clauswitz." "So, does that mean not right now?" Bastian sought clarification, asking. "Yes, that's correct. However, if you have any advice to offer, I am willing to listen." "Ah. I see. I thought you were shouting your opinions to silence me." Odette swiftly shook her head, causing her hair to sway like the dark night. "My apologies, I didn't mean to imply that," she expressed. "If my desires don't align with yours, please do let me know. Although I can't transform into a new person overnight, I will strive to minimize the differences between us to the best of my ability." Her gaze towards Bastian became gentle and tender as she uttered. "I'd rather have a heartless winner than an honorable loser," Bastian said. His eyes drifted from her locks to her elegant hand, which clutched the fabric of her attire tightly. Odette pondered deeply before speaking, "But even if it means sacrificing dignity? Winning at all costs is the essence of Clauswitz's dignity. But that shouldn't apply to Countess Lennart." "Why not?" Bastian asked curiously. Odette hesitated before continuing, "Because that day when you, Countess Lennart, was much more significant to you. During our role-playing as husband and wife, I believe I made it obvious that I would put my wife's needs first. Could it be that your memory is only half functioning?" Bastian's eyes lifted gradually from the body that Odette was trying to shield from his view. "I understand that, but Countess Lennart is aware of our agreement. It's challenging to act as your spouse in her presence. During that moment, feel free to behave as you wish. Keep in mind the considerable sum you'll be receiving in exchange for your services." Bastian rose from his chair, dismissing his jaded counsel. A warm flush of indignation crept up from his rigid posterior, intensifying with each passing moment. The situation seemed increasingly preposterous as time wore on, but he was keenly aware that he held the power to act as he pleased. Bastian had always held little value in satisfying his primal urges, and this remained true. He knew full well that he had the authority to disregard the agreement, but he questioned whether it was worth the repercussions that could follow a fleeting impulse. The answer was clear: it was a clear-cut defeat. After 2 years of playing the role of a counterfeit spouse, the entirety of Odette's existence, as deemed by Bastian, was limited to this. "Then get some rest, Odette," Bastian uttered curtly, his gaze fixed upon her dazed, blue-green eyes. As he made his way across the room and opened the door to leave, Odette remained silent, offering no reply until the door had closed shut behind him once more. Bastian. Chapter 37, A Grateful Person. "What does it feel like to be a newlywed? How are things for you going?" Tira asked an intriguing question as she talked about her dorm experience and recent friendships. "I'm doing quite well myself," Odette replied calmly after replacing the handset. Tira raised an eyebrow inquisitively. "Is that all?" she asked. After much contemplation, Odette smiled. "I'm feeling quite comfortable and finding enjoyment in things." "Where's the new bride who was describing her newlywed life so poorly?" Her explanation caused Tira to burst into laughter. "You're more like the dorm president than anything, with how strict you are." Tira's voice then softened as she reined in her excitement. "Hey, sister." "Yes? Thank you." Tira expressed her gratitude with a heartfelt. "For what?" Odette asked confusingly. "Just all of it. I think I understand now that we live apart and that sister loves me very much. So, thank you and sorry again." Her emotions shifted as she went from excitement to tears. "Are you happy?" Tira asked through her sobs. "Yes, I'm happy." Tira then posed an unexpectedly serious question. "How's the captain? Does he care for and love my sister very much?" Odette gradually unfurled her eyes and shifted her posture to rise from her seated position. As she did so, the brilliant beams of summer light streamed through the windows overlooking the ocean, casting a radiant glow upon the unadorned walls of the petite study, the exact spot that Sandrine had designated for displaying her breathtaking landscape artwork. "Sister?" Odette was startled out of her daydream by Tira's uneasy tone. "Yes, Tira." She beamed, stretching the corners of her lips into a radiant smile, as if Tira were standing right before her. "Well, I'm grateful for him," Odette spoke openly in an effort to ease Tira's concerns. Though Bastian Clauswitz's heartless words sometimes wounded her deeply, Odette couldn't deny her gratitude towards him. He had swooped in just in time when her family was on the brink of destruction, saving them all from certain doom. His aid may have been motivated by his own agenda, but the magnitude of the favor he had done for her was unlike anything she had ever experienced before. And for that, she was filled with an overwhelming sense of appreciation towards her husband, even if their marriage was merely a means to an end. "Phew, that's a relief. My mind feels so much lighter now." Tira's cheerful tone returned in a flash, as she eagerly launched into a discussion about her upcoming weekend plans, a picnic with her pals, a city tour, and even some tennis lessons. It was a life she couldn't have dreamed of just a mere month ago. "I'm afraid I have to go now. I'll give you a ring next time." Tira's voice was drowned out by the clamor of her rowdy surroundings, indicating that her friends had arrived. "Goodbye, sister. Love you," Tira bellowed at the top of her lungs before promptly ending the call. "Goodbye, my dear little sister. I love you," Odette murmured the words she hadn't had a chance to utter before ending the call. After hearing Tira's voice, the surroundings felt even more foreign and desolate, as if her sister's presence had made all the difference. Preferring not to indulge in her own show, Odette rang the bell to summon her maid. After handing over the mail that needed to be sent out urgently, she received a flurry of new letters, most of which were party invitations. Sitting down at her desk, she began to sift through the envelopes, starting with the first one. It was from the wife of Admiral Demel, Bastian's superior, who extended an invitation for them to visit their summer residence. Odette presented a letter of introduction from the maids who had interviewed a few days prior. "You may peruse it and make a decision at your leisure," she stated. As she set the letter aside, the maid presented the next stack of papers. "I believe the current staff at the mansion is still adequate. Is it truly essential to expand our roster of servants?" Odette questioned. "Master has issued the order," the head maid replied resolutely as soon as Odette finished her inquiry. Without further objections, Odette accepted the answer. The household staff were fiercely loyal to their master, and the greater their admiration and reverence for him, the more discontent they harbored towards the hostess. They did not dislike Odette personally, rather, they did so in opposition to her social standing and family. They considered their master's decision to marry a woman of low birth, who had led a fulfilling life without it, as a grievous affront. They thought their master had overcome the restrictions of the old world, but his marriage to Odette only brought him to his knees once more. Odette comprehended the root of their animosity towards her. Bastian, being the grandson of an antiques merchant, was ostracized by the aristocratic society. But, to the common public, he was the personification of the future and their victor. "I'll eat a quick lunch here." Odette read the last of the letters and then made a kind request. The time for a return trip arrived as the busy days of accommodating the stream of visitors came to an end. The summer seemed to have vanished by the time this task was done. Odette was about to ask Bastian's opinion after choosing her invitations when the head maid graciously showed up and presented a sumptuous spread fit for a royalty. A neatly organized platter of freshly made lemonade was served to go along with the expertly made cucumber sandwiches and the cool bowl of chilled tomato soup. This wasn't just any ordinary meal, it included a carefully chosen assortment of foods that weren't usually among Odette's likes. "Thank you, Dora. Go take a rest now." Odette quickly thanked Dora for her tireless work and motioned for the maid to take a well-earned rest. She finished her sandwich and looked at the catalogue the interior decorator she had met the day before had put on her desk. Odette realized that a trip to the artist's workshop was necessary in order to fulfill the time frame for choosing the ideal picture to hang on the library's walls. It was essential to examine a priceless piece of art in person before making a choice. "Dora, is there anything else that requires my attention that I may assist you with?" With a gentle yet commanding presence, Odette asked of the head maid who still lingered in the room. "Oh no, madam. If you need any additional help, don't be afraid to call me." Dora immediately changed her expression and made a courteous bow before leaving. Odette continued to enjoy the last bites of her sandwich and the last ladle of soup as the door softly closed behind her. The head maid overlooked one important aspect about Odette, her extraordinary capacity to put up with things she disliked. She persevered with the lunch despite being a little irritated by the extremely sweet and sour lemonade. Odette soon left the quick meal behind and jumped back into her job as hostess. She was determined not to cause any trouble again as the weekend was coming up rapidly than expected. Middle. "Master, you ran faster than normal today." Butler Lovis greeted Bastian with a beaming smile. In his moments of respite, Bastian found solace in the rhythm of his daily jog through the park. The distance and duration of his route remained unwavering, a testament to his steadfast discipline. After suffering a setback upon returning from Trosa, he had seen a marked improvement in his speed in recent days, surpassing his previous records with ease. As Bastian returned home, a smile of contentment graced his features, but he remained silent. Butler Lovis, anticipating his needs, trailed closely behind, bearing a refreshing cup of lemon-infused water, thoughtfully prepared beforehand. "I have arranged for additional staff to be stationed at the Erdene mansion. Coupled with the servants who will join us when the master relocates overseas, we shall have a surplus of staff." Butler Lovis trailed Bastian like a loyal shadow and uttered. Bastian acknowledged with a swift nod, drained his glass of water in a single gulp and returned it to the tray. "I am grateful for your efforts. I will be heading out in an hour. I shall drive myself, so there is no need for a driver." "Understood, master. I shall have the car prepared. Will you be departing for Erdene immediately after dinner?" "No, I will be spending the weekend in Rats." Lovis' eyes widened. Madam must have been waiting for quite some time, then. He didn't say anything beforehand, so preparations for his arrival in Erdene must be well on. Bastian, however, seemed totally unconcerned, so Lovis stopped interfering. "I shall inform Madam that due to your workload, Master, you will be spending the weekend in Rats." Lovis was so able to ease the surprise situation by offering this suitable alternative. With a nod, Bastian dismissed Lovis and gave him a look that hinted at his desire to be alone. Lovis lingered for a moment, watching his master ascend the stairs. Despite his busy schedule, Bastian made it a priority to spend time with his new bride on weekends. Lovis couldn't help but feel a tinge of regret that his master's newfound marital bliss would go unacknowledged. However, he knew better than to seek any kind of response from Bastian, so he simply swallowed his disappointment and carried on with his duties. Middle. For the first time in a very long time, Odette wore her favorite outfit. Bastian was not delighted with the clothing because it was so light blue. Odette added a pair of tiny pearl earrings to complete her decor. Her face had a bright smile and liveliness for the first time in a long, with little to no makeup on. An unexpected weekend without her husband left her feeling a bit disoriented, but she quickly formulated a solid plan. Her first order of business was to head to Rats to select some paintings, followed by a leisurely private tea time. A tranquil outside cafe seemed preferable to a plush hotel lounge that appeared to have been converted from a social hub. She got an idea of choosing some books from a neighboring bookstore to read. Odette turned around with her handbag and parasol in hand and be greeted by her driver. "Hello, madam, this is Hans. Which car will you be requiring, madam?" he asked in an extremely polite way, leaving Odette a bit taken aback by the outrage of the question. Odette furrowed her brow, deep in thought. The unfamiliar language and customs of the mansion left her feeling bewildered. "I'm sorry, I'm still getting the hang of things here. Could you please explain in more detail?" Hans, the attendant, nodded reassuringly. "Certainly, madam." His kind smile put her at ease. The cars that had been kept in a different warehouse were transported to the new mansion's garage. "You can select the cars here based on your preferences because that is where the master frequently drives. Do you want to see it for yourself?" asked Hans politely. "Yes, I would like that." Odette showed an awkward expression. It appeared as though she had stumbled into a wonderland. This feeling intensified as the attendant led the door to the garage to open. Cars of all sizes and hues were neatly arranged in a line. She was perplexed by the scene because she had imagined no more than 2 cars to the most. Hans gestured towards the rows of sleek cars lined up in the expansive garage. "If you're not inclined towards a car, we could arrange for a carriage," he suggested. Odette's eyes widened as she took in the sight of the impressive vehicles before her. No, I don't think that will be necessary," she rejected, her gaze still fixed on the collection of cars. As the image of Bastian's request replayed in her head, Odette tried to compose herself as a gracious hostess, but the strange sight in front of her was difficult to shake off. "Can you tell me which car my husband uses the least?" she asked, and after some hesitation. This one, I believe, madam." Hans pointed to a gleaming yellow convertible tucked away at the back of the garage. "I'll take that one, then." Odette reacted as if she had just finished a difficult assignment. She appeared to need a little more time than she had anticipated to get used to the Wonderland environment. Bastian. Chapter 38, Husband's Seat. With one look, Franz was certain, the graceful figure moving through the exhibition room, basked in the radiant summer light, was none other than Odette. As she navigated the space, her movements were fluid and effortless, akin to a swimmer gliding through water. The gallery owner trailed behind her, beaming like a loyal companion. When Odette took the initiative to inspect the enticing landscape painting hanging in the middle of the room, Franz refrained from doing so. The artwork was beautiful to look at, but it didn't make an impression on him. However, it seemed that Odette lacked the discerning lens of a true lover of art. A wise move. It's an item that will become more valuable with time. Odette was swayed by the art dealer's sweet talk, but little did she know that her final decision would be a regrettable one. Franz exhaled and forced a searing sting of disappointment down his throat. The disillusionment he felt every time he spoke to his fiancée, whose intellect was hard to discover. Odette turned her back. Amidst the dimly lit corner of the room, there hung a painting that Franz had purchased out of obligation to a personal connection with the artist. The artwork, however, had been neglected due to its lack of marketability. Ironically, it was the same piece that Franz had selected for himself. "Can I also purchase this painting?" Odette inquired without hesitation, revealing her interest in the artwork. "The painting is still available, but there is another potential buyer who is considering it," the seller replied, hinting at a potential competition for the piece. The art dealer was taken aback by the revelation and turned his head in surprise, while Odette's eyes instinctively shifted towards Franz. "Come to think of it, you both are related," the dealer suddenly exclaimed, having belatedly recollected their familial ties. As Franz caught sight of Odette, his body tensed involuntarily, and he held his breath in anticipation. However, it didn't take long for Odette to recognize him. "Hello, Franz. It's been a while." Odette greeted Franz with a friendly smile, prompting him to step out of the shadows. Nervously, he swallowed and furrowed his brow as the sudden brightness caused discomfort to his eyes. Franz remained silent for a brief moment, gazing intently at Odette before finally speaking. "May I ask why you're here?" He moved closer. Since he had lost weight, Franz appeared more restless and alert. "What is your reason for wanting to purchase that painting?" Franz asked inquisitively, lifting his glasses with his fingertips before providing an explanation. The curious looks of those around him went unnoticed. "Simply because it is a stunning work of art," Odette answered, diffusing the awkward tension with a straightforward response, but Franz appeared unrelenting in his questioning. People often criticize artists for haphazardly scattering colors without any basic knowledge of art, which is why some remain obscure. Perhaps, but I believe that beauty standards are subjective and vary from person to person. In that case, what is it about this painting that appeals to you? Franz pressed further, causing a glimmer of a different color to appear in his otherwise gloomy gray eyes. "It's like a dream, the way it captures the flow of light and air. I'm particularly drawn to the colors that evoke the feeling of dusk. Although the subject matter isn't apparent, dreams are inherently mysterious and beautiful," Odette explained, seeking Mr. Linzer's opinion. Luckily, the art dealer quickly nodded his head in agreement, offering his support. "Absolutely, that's what makes it so appealing. And I can assure you that your friend shares the same sentiment, Mrs. Clauswitz, so you need not worry," the dealer reassured her. Odette smiled. "You and Franz must be quite close. In the Rat's art world, there's hardly anyone who hasn't heard of Franz Clauswitz. He's a distinguished collector, knowledgeable in art, and when we have discussions like these, he can come across a bit abrupt, but it's never with ill intent." "I'll take that painting," Franz interrupted, cutting off the art dealer before he could finish speaking. "Look, Franz," the art dealer shot Franz an icy glare, as though he regretted recommending a painting that was now being sold for a low price. But Franz paid him no mind, his eyes fixed on Odette with the same intensity as when he discovered a hidden masterpiece. "One day, that painting will be worth more than all the other works in this gallery combined. I trust your eyes, Odette," Franz told Odette. "But, didn't you make the decision to purchase it before me? It's all right. I can give it to someone who truly understands its value." While he was talking, Franz walked towards Odette with a fresh energy that gave his pale cheeks life. The sudden news of his marriage and the sense of inferiority that gnawed at his chest whenever he thought of the woman who had been defiled by Bastian vanished instantly, like snow melting in the sun. At best, the body was nothing more than a hollow shell that vile beast of a Bastian had just defiled. Franz couldn't bring himself to empathize with the woman on a spiritual level. Yet, Odette remained untainted, retaining her noble and innocent essence in his eye. "Perhaps I could offer my assistance in selecting paintings for you, and in return, would you be willing to join me for a cup of tea?" Franz summoned all his courage and spoke with a tremble in his voice. The exhilarating rhythm of his heartbeat resonated within him. Middle. His piercing eyes were inevitably drawn to the vivid and striking yellow car as he scanned his surroundings keenly. Bastian was about to look away, when a familiar figure caught his attention, leaving him stunned. Odette. His wife. She wasn't supposed to be there. However, there she was, her presence not mistaking his eyes. Bastian stood transfixed, gazing through the expansive lobby staring at his wife. Across the wide street, she emerged from the building like a crescent moon, and even at a far distance, her ethereal presence was unmistakable to him. Yet to his surprise, she wasn't alone. A man, very familiar to his eyes, was walking beside her, and as he peered closer, he recognized him suddenly. Franz Clauswitz. Bastian kept watching with growing unease as they engaged in a surprisingly friendly and intimate conversation, his forehead furrowed deeper upon seeing the scene. Franz was speaking, while Odette listened attentively, beaming into a smile that was far different from the forced one Bastian was accustomed to see that she usually wore. Bastian had walked past that place countless times without giving it a second thought. But as he watched Franz and Odette engrossed in conversation there, he wondered if it was an art gallery. His mind drifted back to a memory from long ago, when the delicate snowflakes of spring had fallen silently over a captivating sight. He had watched as she wandered through the exhibition hall, her eyes shining with excitement and wonder. She had always possessed a keen love for all things beautiful and merry, much like Franz. The similarity had never occurred to him before, but now it seemed so obvious. Bastian wondered what made her come meet Franz without my permission. He then made a deliberate effort to forget the afternoon when he had counted the shadows of snowflakes on the woman's face while she was lost in the art. As he descended the last stairway, he suddenly had a change of heart. He now desired to hear the answer to his question directly from Odette herself. Franz extended what appeared to be a tiny, folded note towards Odette, who had just turned her back. Odette accepted it. Although she got a little hesitant. She was facing him with her back to Bastian, so he couldn't see her face, but he could tell exactly how Franz was feeling. It was entertaining to watch him become agitated like a puppy who needed to go potty. If his mother had seen it, she would have been sick for days. Bastian silently observed his wife increasingly bizarre behavior as she started walking towards the waiting yellow car as the automobile carrying Franz departed the gallery first. She didn't, however, get in the car. Odette provided the driver with short instructions before embarking on a private stroll along the sun-kissed, glistening street. Her light footsteps caused the hem of her blue skirt to flutter rhythmically. Despite having no inclination towards women's fashion, Bastian could easily identify the garment. It was the exact same dress that Odette had donned for the officers' dinner party. Bastian gasped with astonishment. He had believed that his wife was quietly following orders, but it was as though he had caught a glimpse of her deep-hidden secrets. With a flick of his wrist, Bastian elevated the cuffs of his crisp shirt to glance at his watch. His crucial tasks had been completed, leaving him with only one commitment, a dinner engagement. This particular soirée was a gathering of the elite members of the prestigious polo club, who would be congregating to revel in each other's company. As Bastian meticulously smoothed out his attire, his heart raced with anticipation. Suddenly, he looked up and there she was, Odette, gracefully turning the corner. But just as quickly as she appeared, she vanished into the tranquil serenity of the sun-drenched street, leaving no trace of her presence behind. Undeterred, Bastian took a deep breath and propelled himself forward, boldly striding into the dazzling abyss of the scorching summer afternoon. Middle. Under the blazing sun, the heat was almost unbearable. But in the cool embrace of the shade, the air was refreshingly pleasant, like a soothing balm for the skin. Odette unfurled her parasol, its vibrant colors a stark contrast to the bustling cityscape as she strolled leisurely through the vibrant downtown streets. She casually perused the dazzling show windows, admiring the stunning displays before making her way to the bookstore. Upon entering, she was greeted by the intoxicating scent of freshly printed books, intermingled with the faint aroma of ink. The golden dust settled around her as she quietly immersed herself among the sea of readers, enjoying the tranquil ambience of the literary sanctuary. With a carefully selected book tucked under her arm, Odette hastened towards her prearranged destination. She made her way to the open-air cafe situated on the street corner, a place she was intimately familiar with, having visited it in the past to deliver delicate lace. This was the very spot where she would often pace back and forth, her mind consumed with deep contemplation, before ultimately turning away. Silently gliding towards Odette's table, the waiter inquired in a hushed tone, "May I inquire if you are accompanied by anyone this afternoon?" "No, I am here alone." Without hesitation, Odette said. "Come this way, please." With a warm and welcoming smile, the waiter beckoned her to follow him, leading her towards a table on the terrace. It was a prime location, offering breathtaking views of the surrounding area. Odette ordered coffee and a slice of chocolate cake with rich cream and foam after looking over the menu. A knocking sound came from the table as she took the book out of her bag and opened it. "Hello, my dear, you look absolutely stunning today." Odette, determined to rebuff his advances, calmly flipped a page in her book, giving the man a clear indication that she was not interested in engaging in conversation. But the man was undeterred, lingering around the table and boldly inquiring, "May I have the pleasure of joining you?" Thinking on her feet, Odette quickly concocted a lie, informing him that the seat was reserved for her husband. "Sorry, but that seat belongs to my husband." "Ah. I see." To her surprise, the man refused to back down and continued to hover around the table, making it clear that he wasn't going to be dissuaded easily. "Oh, you." Odette's unwanted guest's eyes met Odette's own, and an irrepressible sigh from her lips. She was shocked to see that the man standing in front of her was indeed her husband, Bastian Clauswitz, who had a haughty smirk on his face. Bastian. Chapter 39, Beneath the Thousandfold Veil. The untouched coffee sat on the table, the steam rising from its surface until the abundant bubbles gradually subsided and the liquid cooled to a tepid temperature. Meanwhile, the slice of cake in front of her was in a state of flux, with the chocolate frosting melting into a gooey mess under the heat. The sight of the cake's slow disintegration and the coffee's undisturbed surface gave her a sense of unease, as if she were seeing the world around her fall apart in slow motion. Bastian scrutinized the table before slamming his teacup down with a resounding thud. Finally, Odette raised her gaze from her fidgeting fingers to meet his stern gaze. "Enough with this nonsense, eat," Bastian commanded with a curt gesture towards the untouched coffee and cake. Odette's eyes widened in shock as she regarded her husband's unexpected appearance. "I never expected to cross paths with you in this way. What brought you here?" she asked, trying to be casual about it. Her smile faded, showing a trace of uneasiness as she quickly changed the topic in an effort to divert the conversation from any potential tension, as the afternoon sun seeped through the foliage, casting a warm glow on her face. "I had an appointment nearby. I found you in passing," Bastian said, his eyes studying Odette's face for any sign of discomfort. "Ah. Yes. I see. And you? I don't think I've been informed that you'll be coming to Rats. Am I remembering wrong?" Odette shook her head in response. "No. I didn't report anything." "What brings you here then?" Bastian's pupils shrank. Odette expertly concealed her emotions despite the confusing feeling that she was being reprimanded. "An interior designer asked me to choose several paintings to place on the wall. When I learned that you wouldn't be arriving this weekend, I shifted the timetable up a bit from where it was originally scheduled to be handled next week." A cunning smile played on Odette's lips as she responded to his question. "Is that really it, then?" Bastian's calm and collected demeanor only made Odette more nervous. She fidgeted with the handle of her cup, desperately searching for the right words to say in response to his question. In the company of Franz, Odette felt more at ease. His words had a cunning edge that often left his opponents bewildered, but she found it much preferable to the suffocating tension that Bastian brought. With Franz, all she had to do was smile and respond accordingly, whereas with her husband, even just his gaze left her feeling powerless and vulnerable. Odette found this man to be more challenging and unsettling the more time they spent together. She struggled to take even a sip of water because she felt stifled and her nerves were on edge. Yes. Odette ultimately decided to fabricate the truth. Her refusal to use his brother's half-name only seemed to further enrage Bastian, as he might interpret it as a sign of her foolishly crossing paths with someone from his family. "I stopped by the art gallery to buy a few paintings and I had some spare time. It's been a long since I've gone out, so it would be a shame not to enjoy it before returning home." With a confident smile, Odette concealed her unease and nervousness. Although Bastian's intense blue eyes seemed to look right through her soul, she put up with them in silence without trying to avert them. Bastian wet his lips with half-melted ice water and nodded his head in agreement. In the tense calm, their silence was deafening. It could break an iceberg. He folded his arms casually and looked at Odette. He rested the damp napkin on the table as the sun dipped below the horizon. As the warm glow extended its reach beneath the table, it draped Odette in a deceitful grin, reminiscent of the delicate wedding veil she wore on the solstice day, a smile that was sweet to the eyes but bitter to the heart. Evidently, Odette was keen to keep her encounter with Franz a secret. He remembered his butler Lovis, who was concerned about the madam who would be waiting for her husband with sadness. He let out a ridiculous laugh, thinking how deceitful his wife was. As he looked upon Odette, a feeling of unease crept into his mind. For the first time, he felt himself truly pondering the enigmatic workings of her mind. Beneath a veil of solitude and melancholy, she seemed to harbor a hidden avarice, a voracious appetite for something beyond his comprehension. His thoughts swirled with confusion, as he questioned his place in her world and the nature of their relationship. Why did she persist in her brazen insolence and contemptuous disdain? The answers eluded him, leaving him with a sense of wild bewilderment. Despite the burning curiosity that surged within him, Bastian held his tongue. He knew that beneath the surface of Odette's enigmatic demeanor lay countless layers of hidden depths. Each veil she wore was merely a mask, a facade designed to shield her true self from prying eyes. With each layer peeled back, another presented itself, as though she reveled in the mystery and intrigue of her own being. Bastian knew that the answer he sought would not come easily, for Odette guarded her secrets with an iron will. Bastian's gaze flicked to his wristwatch. "Does your schedule permit any other engagements?" The corners of Odette's lips upturned into a serene smile. "No. As we agreed earlier, our meeting with Hans is scheduled for 6 o'clock sharp in the plaza of City Hall," she replied, her voice imbued with a venomous calm. "Is there any other matter of business we need to address?" Odette shook her head. "No, not really. I've been contemplating a short respite here, but ultimately, I feel drawn back to Erdene," she revealed with a hint of wistfulness in her voice. Bastian nodded understandingly before responding with a wry chuckle. "Ah, a break." His eyes roamed over the scene before him, and they eventually settled on Odette, who sat across from him with an unread book. The tantalizing aroma of coffee and cake drifted between them, tempting his senses. Yet his attention was drawn to the playground behind her, a vibrant tapestry of colors and shapes that he had meticulously crafted with his own hands. Was it not enough just to have that enormous mansion to yourself to relax and enjoy? Even in the midst of his scathing ridicule, Bastian's tone remained remarkably calm. My wife is a very adaptive woman. She was only moving from one cheap rental home to another yesterday, but she apparently became tired of living a life of luxury because she is acting in this way now. Bastian said in a mocking tone. So, are you accusing me now? Odette's forced smile vanished as he nodded in response. If you possess the intelligence to comprehend my words, why do you insist on repeating the same mistakes over and over again? Is missing one adding such a heinous mistake that you must insult me in this manner? After all, you broke your promise first, so I simply adjusted my plans accordingly, Odette shouted. Do you truly believe that we are on the same level? Bastian's expression shifted as he let out a soft sigh and furrowed his brow, lost in thought for a split second. I paid you a just price, which makes me your employer until the end of our contract. Odette remained silent, unsure of how to respond. Just because you're performing the duties of a wife doesn't grant you the rights of one, Bastian spoke firmly. If you're here as a servant, then act accordingly. Remember this, and you'll have a relatively comfortable 2 years. What are your thoughts? Again, Odette remained silent, prompting him to demand, I expect an answer, Odette. Speak up, answer me. His words sliced through the air like a sharp-edged knife, lashing out at Odette with a cold, emotionless ferocity. Understood, Odette replied, finally breaking her long, obstinate silence. Bastian had no desire to continue the talk despite the irreverent emotion that was visible in her intensely crimson eyes. Allow me the pleasure of accompanying you to your awaiting car, he declared, his voice firm and unwavering. Odette cocked her head slightly, a quizzical expression crossing her features. If I say that I am capable of going on my own, is that an unworthy response from a servant? With a steady gaze fixed on Bastian, Odette summoned the courage to pose a daring question. Though a flicker of pain betrayed her emotions, she refused to let a single word escape her lips. It seems you possess a remarkable capacity for judgment. Bastian extended his hand towards Odette, a sardonic smile playing at the corners of his lips. I appreciate your kind words, Odette replied, her tone suffused with a mix of exaggerated politeness and a hint of provocative daring. She took his offered hand, gripping it with a firmness that seemed to suggest she was patronizing him. Bastian grasped hold of the gloved, lace-covered, icy hand tightly. Odette was trembling, and he could feel it through their joined hands. It was a pleasant and a grating feeling all at once. Middle. The drawn-out dinner had stretched far into the night, long past its usual end time. With a heavy heart, Odette pushed herself up from the table, leaving behind the remnants of her half-eaten meal. Despite knowing that self-care was of the utmost importance in times like these, she couldn't help but feel overwhelmed at the prospect of trying to lift her spirits. Odette made her way down the hushed hallway, her footsteps slower and more measured than usual. With each step, she felt as though she were a buoy adrift in the vast, open sea, isolated and alone. Yet, even as she meandered through the quiet halls, she knew that her journey was a brief one. In the light of day, the sense of aimlessness that currently plagued her would dissipate like a wisp of smoke, nothing more than a fleeting, idle thought. I'll do it alone, today. With a heavy heart, Odette dismissed the maids who had been trailing behind her, watching her every move with a critical eye. Weary and drained, she dragged her feet across the threshold of her bedroom, the weight of the day bearing down upon her. Though she sensed the maids' disapproving stares burning into her back, she couldn't bring herself to care. Odette was so exhausted that she wanted to crawl into bed straight away, but she persisted in making her way to the bathroom to take a bath. She gently groomed her hair and changed into a fresh nightgown. She felt much better by the time she stood up with a ribbon attached at the end of her braided hair. Odette stood motionless, gazing at the entrance to the couple's bedroom with a hollow, vacant expression. A deep, resigned sigh escaped her lips, a physical manifestation of the overwhelming sadness and despair that consumed her. Though she was racked with misery and heartache, she refused to place the blame solely on Bastian's shoulders. She had entered into this marriage with full awareness of the challenges that lay ahead, and she was determined to face them head-on. Even though the harsh realities of the situation were far more daunting than she had initially anticipated, Odette knew that this was the best decision she could have made under the circumstances. With sheer force of will, Odette fought to keep her mind from succumbing to the overwhelming despair that threatened to consume her. She made her way over to the table, where a pile of mail awaited her attention. Knowing that retiring to bed in such a despondent state would only make it harder for her to find rest, she resolved to cling to the fleeting glimmers of hope that still remained. She sorted through the odds and ends on the table, refusing to allow herself to become weighed down by the inescapable truth of her situation. After all, she had to make it work, no matter how difficult it might be. Odette painstakingly read the messages, pulled up her nightgown sleeves, and penned a response. There was a letter from her father among them. It was a letter full of rage and profanity directed at the daughter who had embarrassed the family by getting married to a lowly man. She dropped the torn letter into the garbage, thinking it was good that he had regained his strength. It was quickly followed by a letter from Sandrine, in which she listed her favorite furnishings, jewelry, plants, and flowers along with her wish list for the garden. She carefully committed a handful of noteworthy items to memory, then recorded them in her trusty notebook. Among the entries was the name and contact information of the merchant whom Franz had recommended for the finest Filiamade ornaments, which she jotted down just beneath the others. With nothing else to occupy her thoughts, Odette surrendered herself to the comfort of her bed. As she lay there, the soothing sound of the ocean's gentle waves drifted in through the open window, carried on the cool, nocturnal breeze. With a determined effort, Odette closed her eyes and banished the image of the repulsive man that had plagued her thoughts. Though the weight of her troubles made her feel ancient beyond her years, she refused to let them consume her. Slowly but surely, the gentle touch of the moonlight lulled her into slumber. Throughout the long, lonely night, the steady cadence of the waves provided her only solace, and it remained by her side until the first light of dawn crept into the sky. That's okay. Nothing is wrong. Everything is going to be fine. A sense of calm washed over her as she repeated the reassuring words to herself, like a soothing melody that brought her solace. Bastian. Chapter 40, Let's make an effort to win this time. Odette peered through the window nervously as the vehicle descended more into the mountain's interior. Even under the brightest of skies, the dense grove of conifers that surrounded them emanated a foreboding air. In stark contrast to the oppressive heat they had left behind at the mountain's base, a cool breeze whistled through the sky-piercing trees, evoking an unearthly mood. The hush of the dense forest enveloped them, broken only by the measured hum of the car's engine. Odette's words pierced the stillness like a dagger, infused with caution and uncertainty. "Do we have the right way?" she asked, the first words to escape her lips since their departure from Erdene. Bastian maneuvered the curving road with ease, his gaze fixed straight ahead and his chin inclined just a little. Odette couldn't help but be annoyed by his callous attitude, as if she were nothing more than an annoying insect, even though she didn't let it show. She told herself, "Don't think about it," and her eyes returned to the world beyond her window. Does a villa possibly exist in this area? Odette wondered to herself. Yet she was skeptical, and decided against asking any more questions. In any way, talking to him seemed totally pointless. In a blink of an eye, the dreaded weekend had arrived, forcing her to face the man she wished to avoid. However, there was a glimmer of comfort in the fact that they had been invited to the Demel's villa in the neighboring city. This invitation meant that they wouldn't have to endure each other's company for long stretches of time. With this in mind, she believed that she could manage the situation as long as the man cooperated, and she was determined to do her part. Odette closed the book she had only just begun reading with a quiet sigh. She deeply wished she had a servant with her instead of her so-called husband. Sadly, Bastian had insisted on taking the wheel himself. He claimed that the Demel's family had enough staff and they didn't need his own vehicle. Consequently, the maid and servant who were prepared to go with them were left behind. The man in question had led a more aristocratic life than any other aristocrat, yet he possessed a surprisingly unpretentious and pragmatic demeanor. Some ridiculed this as a sign of lowly bloodline, but Odette viewed it as a highly commendable trait. However, her current feelings towards him did not align with this perspective. "Oh!" Odette let out a soft exclamation when their car emerged from the shadowy embrace of the coniferous forest. Bastian cast a quick glance at his wife, who was hastily rolling down the car window, and was now staring at the Demel family's magnificent villa with a look of rapturous enchantment. The villa was renowned for its breathtaking view, and it seemed that Odette, like many before her, was completely under its spell. Bastian slowed down the car as they drove down the driveway leading to the villa. The water's gleaming surface could be glimpsed beyond the rows of birch trees. The villa's most prized possession was a lake that was formed when glaciers melted. The surrounding tall mountains were completely white from the yearly snowfall, which did not melt even in the middle of July. The colors of objects here seemed especially rich and vibrant, perhaps as a result of the clean air. The fresh greenery, high and blue sky, and warm smile on the cold woman's face all complemented one another. Odette's protest had been utterly absurd at this point. Bastian let out a laugh at its ridiculousness. It seemed that her objections had melted away like candles wax with the appearance of a single, stunning view. Odette was a fanciful woman who often smiled with an air of pure innocence, much like a child whose eyes gleam with a sense of wonder and amazement, eager to explore and marvel at the world around them. Yet, as always, this flickering light faded as soon Bastian met her eyes. With eyes as wide and startled as a rabbit's, Odette quickly averted her gaze from Bastian's. Just then, the car pulled up in front of the villa, where the Demel family's servants were waiting already. "Please do your part well today," he said with a serious and intimidating tone. While preparing to exit the car, Bastian reminded Odette of her role as his wife, chiding her as if scolding an immature child. "I understand," Odette replied with a hint of defiance. "I'll do my best to be a ruthless winner. But before we begin, I have a question for you, Bastian." Despite her sharp retort, Odette maintained a facade of polite formality, unwilling to let her guard down. "Go ahead. Is the advice to win by any means necessary still applicable when the opponent is you?" Odette asked, raising her metaphorical claws once again, though she knew it would be of no use. "I suppose I'll have to rely on you for the answer since I'm not allowed to do the thinking." Looking at her with an amused and indulgent expression, Bastian laughed at her clumsy attempt to assert herself as an equal opponent, once again. "Let's make an effort to win this time. It might actually be fun," he replied arrogantly before stepping out of the driver's seat. Just then, the Marquis and Marchioness of Demel emerged, signaling their arrival. Bastian gave a gentle sigh and courteously opened the passenger's door, gesturing for Odette to take his hand. She followed his lead, perceptive and cooperative as ever. "You both look absolutely stunning today. Like newlyweds, I must say." Admiral Demel's laughter boomed through the warm summer air as he observed the couple. Casting a quick glance at each other, Odette and Bastian beamed with genuine affection, basking in the Admiral's compliment. The couple, newlyweds of only a month, looked every bit like a pair of love-drunk bride and groom. Their appearance perfectly suited their roles, lost in a dreamy state of love and sheer fondness. Middle. The young count made a dramatic entrance as the final guest to arrive at the villa. He was accompanied solely by his young daughter, cradled in the arms of her nanny. Marchioness Demel took the opportunity to introduce Odette to the count, just as her husband Bastian had gone off hunting with the other guests. The two met in the moment that felt almost cinematic, surrounded by the lush beauty of the villa's surroundings. In a voice that rang with eloquence, the Marchioness of Demel introduced the count to Odette. "May I present to you, Count Sanders, a relative of our family and a distinguished scholar who is currently studying botany at the University of Rats," she said, gesturing towards the young man. She then turned towards the nanny holding the young daughter, "And this is Mrs. Clauswitz, the wife of Captain Clauswitz, a naval hero and my husband's favorite subordinate. They were just recently married last month." With a gracious smile, she brought the three of them together, creating an atmosphere of warmth and camaraderie. With a gentle smile, Count Sanders greeted Odette and congratulated her on her recent marriage. "Maxime von Sanders. Mrs. Clauswitz, congratulations on your marriage." His demeanor exuded both intelligence and warmth, making him seem every bit the scholarly gentleman that he was known to be. "Odette Clauswitz." "Thank you, Count." Odette gave her a greeting that was flawlessly seamless despite the fact that it was a name she was not used to hearing often. Marchioness Demel guided Count Sanders to the table under the pergola. She gestured for him to take a seat facing Odette. "This way, Maxime." Only when the nanny had left the room with his sleeping daughter and gone into the mansion did the young scholar turn his attention to the tea and snacks. It was clearly visible how much he loved and cared for his daughter. After a minute of interruption, the conversation around the tea table naturally resumed. Count Sanders, the final person to arrive at the social event after a lengthy absence, served as the topic's main character. Odette attentively listened to the cheerful chatter around the table while sipping the tea delicately. It wasn't until Count Sanders mentioned his recent return from an overseas research trip that she realized why his name had been unfamiliar to her in the high society circles of the capital. When Maxime returned to Berg, he hardly attended social gatherings, which led to speculations that he might have been afflicted with a serious illness, Marchioness Demel remarked. Count Sanders, when confronted by the Marchioness, merely shook his head with a bashful grin. I wanted to prioritize spending time with my young daughter, whom I've been away from for some time. Children grow up so quickly, you see. This time won't come again, so every day is precious and worthwhile. His soothing tone and gentle demeanor radiated comfort and ease reminiscent of a warm summer afternoon, and his eyes, expressions, and subtle movements conveyed the same sentiment. Count Sanders has a gentle and charming demeanor, complimented one of the guests. He is a wonderful father and sets an excellent example for those who neglect their family duties. The Martian is added. Another guest jokingly suggested, perhaps we should gather all the hunting party attendees and have Count Sanders give them a lesson on fatherhood. Count Sanders' ears began to slightly blush as compliments began to flooding from all directions. Odette noticed it and her lips curled into a soft smile. The man, a botanist, exuded a vibe resembling the subject he studied. Odette lowered her voice, curious about Count Sanders' wife. But isn't Countess Sanders with him? Where is she? The lieutenant colonel's wife, sitting beside her, let out a startled look and slapped Odette on the arm. Please do not mention the Countess's name. She passed away during childbirth, and it was a great loss for Count Sanders. He went through a lot of pain and grief because he deeply loved his wife. Thankfully, he is finding solace in their daughter, who bears a striking resemblance to her mother. Ah. I see. Odette's countenance became clouded with shock as she learned of the tragic fate of Countess Sanders. She was at a loss for words, only managing to utter a brief in response to the lieutenant colonel's wife. Just then, the group of hunters returned, their boisterous footsteps shattering the peacefulness of the summer afternoon. With his hair tousled and sweat dampening his platinum locks, Bastian arrived at the tea table. He flashed a charming smile and extended his hand to Odette, who took it without flinching, despite the lingering scent of animal blood and gunpowder on him. Marchioness Demel, a skilled hostess, made her way to introduce her guests with a bright smile. Captain Clauswitz and Count Sanders, I believe this is the first time you two have met? She inquired. Bastian Clauswitz extended his hand for a handshake, introducing himself after the hostess's introduction. Pleased to meet you. I'm Bastian Clauswitz. Although it was considered inappropriate for a person of lower class to initiate a handshake, Count Sanders showed no signs of offense. He appeared to be someone who valued sincerity over formalities. It's a pleasure to meet the hero you see in the newspapers, Captain Clauswitz. Bastian and Count Sanders exchanged pleasantries with a cordial handshake, and the Count expressed his admiration for the heroic feats Bastian had accomplished, as reported in the newspapers. The two men, who hardly resembled one another and appeared to be of another species, had Odette's attention in a blank stare. Her heart once yearned for a partner as comforting as the sun's warm embrace, a tranquil union akin to a gentle stream flowing peacefully. A love that blossoms from friendship, creating a haven of comfort and solace for each other. But fate had other plans, and she found herself masquerading as the spouse of a man who was the polar opposite of her aspirations. Odette's eyes darted away, and she felt a peculiar sensation in her chest. The sun was descending behind the towering snow-capped peaks, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. As she gazed upon the breathtaking scenery, it dawned on her that she had traveled a great distance to get here.